So first of all, just want to say welcome to Alberta, welcome to Edmonton. Thanks everyone very much for joining us both in person here in the room and online. I haven't yet seen who we've got online, but I know we have a number of people that we're going to be joining. So hopefully they'll be able to engage in the discussions also. Briefly, so I'm Hussein Keshwani. I'm the Chief Provincial Veterinarian for Alberta, and I just took over that post about 6 months ago. Many of you would have known Dr. Keith Lehman, who retired from the post recently, and he would have actually been our main rep to the planning committee until recently. So I can't take a lot of credit for the program, but I know it's going to be a great program that the group has put together. Oh, my phone's going off. So a lot of you would have been to CBLHC before, but it has been going for, I think this would be its 20th year. I'm not sure if there are any interruptions for the pandemic, but 2007 was the first time it was held in this format alongside the Penware Conference. And so there's been a number of animal health themes along the way: traceability, various animal diseases, and tabletop exercises to exercise response to those diseases. In past years, there's been welfare topics, mutual aid coordination, emergency management. So lots of themes. One of the principles of having it alongside Penware is because Penware attracts a diverse audience. So not only people at the technical level in terms of government and some of the specialists within industry groups, but a lot of people that are sort of more on the ground, producer extension, as well as regulators, elected officials. And so I know there's been various topics, and depending on the topic, you get a different level of engagement of those different parties. So the organizing group wanted to choose something that was sort of equally relevant to all of the stakeholders that we want in the room. And so the topic for this year is around communication and the increasing challenges in effective communication between all sort of levels and aspects of the agriculture industry, whether that's on the ground, elected officials, even between levels of government and between governments. It's obviously been an increasing challenge, and there's lots of work that could be done to improve the ways that we disseminate information and ensure accurate information. So not a challenge that's unique to agriculture by any means, but it is one that we have to grapple with because ultimately we're part of these emergency management systems. We're part of the broader public health system for a lot of the work that we do, and being able to respond effectively means being able to disseminate information in a timely manner and actually have people trust that information and act upon it. And we've seen lots of examples in the last few years where delays or public pushback against the authorities that we have to utilize to deal with livestock diseases, many of which are also public health threats, have been challenged and don't necessarily have the same public support that they may have in the past. So that's what we're going to examine over the next couple of days. Just a little bit about the structure. It's going to be, you may have noticed on the program, but essentially this afternoon is going to all be speakers. So we'll have a little bit of time for questions after each, but we'll be primarily getting sort of a download of information from our various speakers today, with the intention that tomorrow is all panel discussions, panels and then group discussion among this room. So relatively small groups, so I think it'll be a great discussion. Everyone should be able to contribute as well as online. So looking forward to that very much. To our speakers, we have a fairly jam-packed agenda, so we'll try and keep you on time, and Tahnee or I will come up to maybe wave you down if we go too much over time, but we do want to allow time for good discussion or questions at the end as well. So again, interest of time, we'll keep introductions of the speakers quite short. So not because we don't want to sort of know all about yourselves, but it is a small enough group that hopefully be able to circulate and meet everyone through the next two half days. And I think that's all the housekeeping I have. So Tahnee, if you want to come up and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. Tahnee Szymanski. I'm the state veterinarian down in Montana. I'll just be really brief. I'll say two things. One, I am a solidly mediocre co-host, but you guys can all thank me tomorrow when we are on time because our American representatives are dropping like flies. Family emergencies, personal emergencies, and schedule conflicts. So we might have a couple gaps in the agenda, but I think that based upon all of the expertise here in the room, I would agree it will be a good discussion. And then I'll just say very briefly also, My best illumination of the need for like a plan for how to communicate and engage with industry and with the groups that we represent is in 2011, we were working on a rule change in the state of Montana around trichomoniasis, and we traveled around the state and did a bunch of public meetings. And we were talking about changing some of the structures of a response. And then we were also talking about potentially having an open cow rule. We did a public meeting in Fergus County, Montana, which is one of our big heavy cattle counties in the state. We had 3 people that were not employees of the Department of Livestock in the room with us. About a year later, fast forward, we diagnosed trichomoniasis in a herd in Fergus County, and it spiderwebbed really fast. And pretty soon we had 12 herds under quarantine. We tested 10,000 plus bulls. It was a huge investigation that took many, many months. We did a series of public meetings after that detection, went back to the exact same room in Fergus County. We had 70 people in the room. And then 2 weeks later, we did a second meeting in a smaller community in the same county. We had 100 people there. So figuring out how to engage with our stakeholders in peacetime is really, really critical so that we can get them good information so that it's not such a panic kind of on the back end. And I think that a lot of what's to follow will illuminate that. So looking forward to the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Tahnee. So I'll just double check. Are we ready with the screens already? Okay, great. So our first presenter, our keynote speaker, is going to set the stage for the discussions through the rest of the afternoon and through tomorrow. And we have with us Dr. Ataharul Chowdhury, who's joining us from Ontario. So he's an associate professor and graduate program coordinator in the Capacity Development and Extension Program at University of Guelph. He's a former president of the Association for International Agricultural and Extension Education, and he leads interdisciplinary research on trust, misinformation, digital transformation, and innovation in agriculture, with a particular focus on strengthening the resilience of agri-food systems and rural communities. Through collaborations with national, provincial, and international partners, his work advances knowledge mobilization, advisory systems, and community engagement to support evidence-informed decision-making. So please help me welcome Dr. Chowdhury.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for a nice introduction. As Dr. Keshwani mentioned that I'm a faculty, I'm an educator. And this morning, I've been participating in many sessions. So the things I do research, and I also generate a lot of concept and ideas. And I feel a little bit anxious about how, I can really do something which is meaningful for the kind of folks here presented. And so, first of all, I like to, I like to thank you, Keith Lehman, who contacted me initially, and definitely Dr. Hussein Keshwani, who coordinated with me for this keynote talk. So you can see from the presentation, there are a couple of concepts there, right? Rebuilding trust, participation, and advisory capacity. And I'm sure you're thinking about, what does it has to do with communication, right? So how many people know about extension and advisory discipline? If you can raise hand. Okay. It's good. Only 2 or 3 people. I think I have really good things to share with you and something really new, something probably you don't know. And as I said, I also have good notes, right? So that I make sure that, the message that's to be delivered, I can deliver that. So here today, my central argument is straightforward. In terms of communication, I want to say that it's not simply that producer and public lack information, right? And we have more information than ever before. And the deeper problem we have is determining which information is credible, whom to trust, and how to make decision under uncertainty. And that is why, I will argue that we need to rethink livestock extension advisory system. The future role is not only to transfer knowledge and information. It's more about sustained participation, mediate disagreement, and rebuild trust across institutions, jurisdictions, and communities. So I organized my talk around 4 ideas. I will talk about evolution of agriculture and livestock extension. So there I will try to bring a little bit of concept and ideas that probably many of you sounds not familiar. And then I will bring the era of information disorder. I'm sure like probably you're also thinking about what this concept is about, right? And then I will talk about AI in extension advisory. And then I think one of the key important thing is to talk about how we can build the response, right? So here, I want to start the talk with, when I were talking here, there is something happening in eastern side of the country, right? And there are a couple of comments you can see. The comment is not to show is not about who is right or wrong, but it's about like, there is wildfire smoke, which really crosses jurisdiction. And you can see there are contested narratives actually emerge from there, right? So the advisory challenge here is to keep, evidence-based, is to, how to protect public health, livelihoods, and cooperation at the center of the discussion, right? And even when, we know blame travels faster than smoke, right? So this is the context in which I think we're meeting for talking about cross-border livestock issues. So we often assume that the problem is lacking information. But I would say it's not, we are living in a trust-scarce world. It's not an information-scarce world. I don't know how many people agree with me. Maybe in the past, it may be true in the past that we have lack of information. But we know with digitalization, with all the tools, people can access information more readily, right? And consider a producer, making a vaccination decision, all right? And that producer may receive advice from a veterinarian, see a government recommendation, encounter a viral social media post, and receive conflicting message from peers. So this is the world actually we are living and trying to do our best. And that is why misinformation is not only an information problem, right? It affects relationship, participation, and the capacity of advisory system to support decision. So the key issue is not merely information availability. It is whether trust is justified and whether producer remain engaged in the conversation. Okay, so that's the most important thing. And so from there, 4 actually factors, or I can say forces, reshape, how the knowledge moves, especially livestock knowledge moves. The first thing we face, information overload. You may agree or disagree with me, but like with artificial intelligence and digital platforms, can generate enormous amounts of content, but volume does not guarantee accuracy or relevance. Second, institutional authority is increasingly contested. Producers and members of the public may no longer accept advice simply because it comes from a government officials or a researcher. Third, advisory communication and moving on to privately governed digital platforms. I'm talking about, social media, right? And finally, information ecosystem are becoming fragmented and emotional. And what I mean with that, you will see that farmers, even in community members, are increasingly gathering in communities that reinforce particular beliefs and identities. So that means the traditional top-down communication, which is definitely works still, but it is facing challenge, right? Because in this environment, it is important not only distributing the facts, but to address the distrust, emotional attachments, and social fragmentation, right? So it's not only distributing information on facts, you have to address those things, which cannot be only work with top-down communication. And so that said, livestock misinformation is often treated as a communication problem, as I said earlier. The common response is like, if we explain the science more clearly, correct the false claim, or produce a better fact sheet, the misinformation will disappear. Unfortunately, that is not the case. A vaccine rumor may begin within a trusted social relationship, right? And it may then be amplified by an algorithm, right? And connected to a political identity, and then finally received by producer who feel poorly supported by existing institutions. And when I talk about institution, I'm talking about extension advisory institutions. So that means the challenge operates several levels, right? It is relational because it depends on trust. It is structural because platform and institutions shape information flows. It is political because identity and power influence interpretation. And it is technological because algorithm accelerate circulation. And finally, it is advisory because producers may lack accessible and trusted support. So no single communication campaign can resolve all 5 dimensions. We need, in this talk, I will argue, we need a system response. And I'm sure like probably you have a kind of metaphor what the system look like. If you think about your vehicle or computer, it is a system, right? It has a different part. I'm gonna talk about, as I mentioned, that's why I asked, like, I have to know like how many people know about extension advisory. So I think it's important, that's why I thought, I know like we are the only program in Canada, I can proudly say that, still continue in the University of Guelph, higher education in extension advisory. So that's the program part of capacity development extension. So many of the universities discontinue for whatever reason. So that's maybe another topic for a talk. So here I'm going to talk about a little bit of, what kind of agricultural extension or extension and advisory support I'm dealing in this talk. So here you can see extension 1.0, and I'm sure like some of you who work in that system for a long time, they are very much familiar with that, which we call technology transfer, right? Extension 1.0 was dominated by technology transfer. Knowledge was generally assumed to flow from researcher and expert to producer through a relatively linear process, right? And then we have pluralistic and farmer-centered, extension 2.0. It became more pluralistic and farmer-centered. When I say pluralistic, you don't see only government is providing extension. There's so many organizations. And we are more talking about emphasis on participation, dialogue, and farmer learning. So it's more farmer-centered. Then extension 3.0, which introduced a network or innovation system perspective. And especially some of the talks that I attended, they're talking about innovation system because it's not only about communication between 3 or 4 stakeholder. It's more about communication of the whole system, whether it's producer, researcher, businessman, right, government, civil society, and even other political actors. So that's we call innovation system. And Extension 4.0, which is the age of digitalization and AI, it built on these earlier shift I mentioned from 1.0 to 3.0, but it responds to digital ecosystem and artificial intelligence, fragmented information environment, and the declining trust that I mentioned at the very beginning of this talk. So the important point is that Extension 4.0 is not, we are living right now, is not simply digital extension. It is a human-centered and participatory system in which digital tools support, but not replace, relationship, judgment, and trust. So that's we need to think about how we can build. It's not easy, but it's definitely doable. So here I wanted to bring that diagram which we developed through Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United Nations for a work that we have done, and it is being applied like around 16 countries in Asia, Africa, and also Latin America. And as I said, extension is often described too narrowly as delivery of information, but effective extension do much more than this. So the first, it involves education, right? And it helps producer understand, question, interpretation, and apply knowledge rather than simply receive recommendations. Second, it develops capacity. The goal is not to tell someone what decision to make today, but to strengthen their ability to evaluate evidence and make decisions in the future. Third, extension support collaboration problem solving. That means, especially in the livestock sector, livestock health decisions are rarely made under ideal conditions. We know that. They are shaped by farm finances, labor, regulation, infrastructure, local disease risks, animal welfare, and community expectations. So therefore, advisory professionals must work with producers rather than simply communicating things to them, right? They need to work with them. So this distinction is very important because in a period of misinformation, when trust grows through relationships, dialogue, responsiveness, and demonstrated understanding of people's actual circumstances. So you can see from this diagram, it is actually developed in 2012. We had a conference of innovation researcher and a scholar around the world. We met, I think, in Hamilton, in Ontario. And based on that, they developed that, especially those who work in the knowledge system. And here you can see that when I talk about extension as a system function, I'm talking about how to build relationship, right, with not only producer but also different system actors, and how to broker knowledge and decision making among those systems. So that means a strong livestock and advisory system should be assessed not only how many producers they actually reach out, or how many people in their event they attended. They should be assessed by whether it improves decision making, strengthen relationship, connect institutions, support participation, and increase the capacity to respond to emerging challenges. And that is, we rarely see that in the system happening, right? We're still having about numbers. Because innovation brokering needs also political engagement, right? You need to support from policy people, right? Here, I don't want to take a long time from here. I want to just mention here that means, from communication perspective, livestock extension has 4 roles. One is science communication, and I'm sure like you are very familiar with KTT, knowledge translation and transfer, that we heavily used in our system, extension education, and advisory services. So, but I want to mention a little bit about, extension education, which I'm part of, and then KTT, that especially in practice community, used oftenly in our Canadian system. Extension education actually somehow prepare for next generation extension professionals who work in the service, right? Extension service. So the distinction is important because knowledge translation and extension education are sometimes we treat it, interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. Knowledge translation and transfer are valuable operational approaches, right? They help move research findings into practice and can make scientific knowledge more accessible and usable, which is needed. On the other hand, extension education is a broader disciplinary field. It draws on adult education, communication, sociology, psychology, and community development, right? And its purpose is not only to transfer knowledge, explicit knowledge. I'm coming to the knowledge in the next slide. So it supports learning, dialogue, critical reflection, trust, and adaptation, which is needed for today's world. So the distinction matters because a producer may fully understand a scientific recommendation and still decide not to follow it. And it's because their decision may reflect their experience, the cost, identity, distrust, and risk perception, or local condition, where extension education actually helps to deal with those kind of issues that is needed today. And so extension, where knowledge KTT asked the question, how do we move the evidence faster, which is sometimes needed when you have the crisis communication, right? But for everyday life, I mean, if you think about like incremental growth, innovation, and resilience, we need to ask, what extension education asks, how do people learn, interpret, negotiate, and act on that particular evidence? Right? So that's the extension education actually does, right? So that's sometime, in our system, I mean, based on my work or observation, I see that we are not sometimes aware of that. So again, I'm probably repeating a lot about the extension is more than information because that's, you need to, know sometimes repetition is important. So effective advisory system depend on at least 3 forms of competence, right? The first is relational competence, right? We producers are more likely to engage with advisors who listen, who understand their circumstances, and remain present over time, right? That's very important, right? When they need it, they can contact and find them, right? And demonstrate respect the way people work to do, because, agriculture is not only simply science, it's science and culture. And I probably, agriculture is agri and culture, right? There is kind of a historical relationship with that. And the second is educational competence needed, right? So advisors need to support learning rather than simply, deliver instructions, right? And this includes helping people compare options, interpret uncertainty, right? And build confidence in decision making. There are so many options. Which one I take, right? And I'll come to the point of trust. The concept of trust at the end. People definitely make a decision based on trust. And the way we feel trust is like, it's not a blind thing. It's also a systemic thing, right? So that I'm gonna bring at the end. And the third is participatory competence, right? What I mean here livestock health solutions are stronger when producers, veterinarians, researchers, policymakers, and other actors can jointly examine the problems, right? And adapt responses to local realities. So these competences are especially important when the trust is low. If we agree, we are living in trust-scale world. And when people feel ignored or judged, they may withdraw from formal advisory system. And that's why we see that there are a lot of pushback from our farmers. They don't even don't trust researcher too sometimes, right? And they turn towards sources that offer belonging, emotional validation, even when these sources are unreliable. They might be wrong, but they believe in it. Right? So that's needed. We need this kind of communication skills. It's not about only translating knowledge. That's, science communication or other does, which is needed, but we need more than this. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we don't need science communication. We need it. So if you understand, I'm sure like some of you understand what is information and knowledge. As I said, like I'm an educator. I like to talk about concept, and my role is to, bring different concept. And as long as it helps you to think differently, that is the success of my talk, right? And maybe act differently, right? So here, I want to mention about two things. One is tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge. And some of you probably know about tacit knowledge comes from experience. You cannot explain it, but you know it, right? And explicit knowledge, which you can express it, right? Through manuals, through instruction, right? And farming actually has both, right? And when especially, tacit knowledge, like you can read research paper, we can read different protocol, different standard, explicit knowledge. But tacit knowledge comes from experience, like people when apply that knowledge. So the role of extension, where I don't want to go to explaining this model, is a little bit different model. It will take time. But where I wanted to mention here, you can see from tacit to tacit, tacit to explicit, explicit to explicit, and explicit to tacit. The main message is here. From tacit to tacit, extension meet producers. They understand, they empathize, their livelihood, their life, people have a life as well as people have work, right? So they understand and they empathized, and then that tacit knowledge, being discussed in meetings like this, in groups, right? And then that tacit knowledge get explicit. I take notes. I somehow do thematic analysis, right? Or develop some kind of report. And based on that, we develop manuals, standard. That is explicit knowledge. We write papers, right? And so that explicit knowledge that is, I think, the science communication and KTT work very well. But then when it goes to explicit to tacit, right, when you go to the community and discuss that recommendation, you are actually talking about also their experience, right? So that means what I wanted to tell here, that extension has to play a role of facilitation, interaction of these knowledge bodies, right? If you want to say whether knowledge is relevant and effective. So here, now I want to bring about one of the main issues here, the information disorder. And I'm sure like you're pondering, have you heard about information disorder? Maybe some of you, because misinformation is a very big topic for last 7 or 10 years. So, here, the main point I wanted to say here, that if you talk about misinformation, disinformation, fake news, these also being politically misused. And that's why European Union created a joint commission in 2017 when this was really growing, borderland direction. They actually say, no, we don't say misinformation, we say information disorder. Because it's not about whether information right and wrong, it's about also what is the intention of information dissemination, right? So we are dealing with false claim, deliberate deceptive content, true information used misleadingly, platform amplification, we see political framing and fragmented trust network. Here, the issue is about, think about like livestock system are particularly exposed because decisions often have immediate consequences for animal health, right? And farm income as well as food system. Rather than saying whether it's right or wrong, it's important to say that what is the intention behind the information circulation, right? So here you can think about like maybe a producer get a new information that about vaccination, and they think, okay, I should share about it because it might help other people, but they don't know whether it's right or wrong. But the information might be wrong. So that means the intention is not wrong, but then it's inaccurate. It's harming people, right? So it's called misinformation. But when malinformation is based on genuine information, right information, but presented out of context. Think about like there might be, rare adverse event may happen during the vaccination program, right? And people might use it as a way of like generalizing. The event is real, but they're using it in a kind of harming, as a propaganda, right? Kind of harming other people, believing that, oh, this vaccination project may be harmful for us. But it can happen. Rare things can happen, right? So that's the dangerous part. That's the malinformation. And we know disinformation is like false information, inaccurate information. People share to harm other people, right? So here, that's why it's important to understand the interaction, context, and amplification in order to understand how we can support, people and how we can build trust, even given that we have so much volume of information right there. And we know misinformation is spread very fast because mainly three factors. There are many factors, but I want to share three factors. One is psychological. Psychologically, people are more likely to accept information that confirms their existing beliefs. I think you all do, more or less, right? And emotional claims also attract attention because fear, anger, and outrage can make a message feel urgent and even memorable, right? And it is social because people rely on trusted peer communities, right? A message from a neighbor, producer group, family member, or respected influencer may carry more weight than a formal institutional statement. And it is technological because digital platforms reward engagement. We know that people produce money through YouTube, right? And other media. And content that provoke a strong reaction is often promoted more widely, whether it is accurate or not, right? So that is why, correcting the fact is necessary, but often insufficient. So we must also understand the relationships, emotions, and digital system through which the claim travels in the information ecosystem. So what's happening? I mean, as I said, when I talked to a few of even my society, I got a pushback. I heard that, yeah, if you provide the right information, it's correct. We solve the misinformation. Well, okay, if this is the case, okay, but if misinformation takes place, what is the consequences? Because it erodes trust in key institutions. That's the problem. So what I mean the institutions, right? When people repeatedly encounter conflicting claims, scandals, political argument, or inaccurate content, they may begin to distrust all sources, right? Rather than distinguishing between reliable and unreliable ones. And that's happened many times. Right? We know that. Government agencies may be seen as a politically motivated, right? Media organization may be viewed as selective or sensational. And universities and scientific institutions may be accused of being disconnected from practical realities. And at the same time, digital platforms create an environment in which distrust itself becomes amplified and reinforced. So the result is not about simply disagreement. It is a weakening of the shared institution or shared reality that we make together, whether media, government, or researcher. So that's the weakened, right? So here, when trust declines, the entire response system becomes slower and more fragile. So that's the problem, right? If you don't deal with the misinformation. And especially for agriculture and livestock are particularly vulnerable to misinformation because they are sit at the intersection of several sensitive issues. Livestock production is scientific, but it is also a livelihood. It is economic, but it is also connected to identity, history, land, rural culture, as well as community. It is shared by regulation, trade, food, preference, animal welfare, environmental diverse, as well as political values. And a livestock producer is not simply a recipient of technical advice. We need to understand. He or she may be a business owner, animal caregiver, employer, community leader, environmental steward, and also participate in contexted public debate. So we need to understand that identity. So I don't want to go the history here, but I wanted to mention what I'm talking today is not new. We traced back the agricultural misinformation maybe 19th century when I don't know whether you know about Lysenkoism. Thomas Lysenko, who is a Russian scientist, who said like if you can climatized plant and that the climatization can also transfer to the next generation of the plant. So he rejected the Mendelian theory, and it was supported by the then government, socialist government of Russia, and it was thought of one of the great cause of one of the factor for great famine. And also there is another case, Great Leap Forward, where China government thought about, okay, we have enough food, so all the farmers should actually convert it to industrialization rather than moving from farming to doing more industry. It's called ideology-driven development, and that's also cause of famine in China that period. We know about from 21st century GMO campaign and other thing. 2021, I'm sure like some of you read in the newspaper about Sri Lankan organic farming case and tied to food security and then political unrest. And now you're talking about nutritional livestock, genetics and other thing who's shaping public health and diets and animal health choices, including lab meat and all of the things like there are a lot of debates that are going on. So it's nothing new that we are talking about, right? And so the today's battleground is more about livestock welfare and myth and narratives, right? It's vaccine and misinformation, food myths and dietary fads, also targeted anti-science narratives that we see in the livestock sector. So some example I want to talk about, you can see from the mRNA cattle vaccine case that got panic, right? In just 1 or 2 years back, it shows that how a technology can become politically controversial even before it is widely available. right? Online claims suggested that cattle would be forcibly injected with gene-altering mRNA vaccine, and that the consumer eating that meat would somehow be vaccinated without their consent. So these claims combined several powerful concerns: the food safety, government control, and distrust of biotechnology. And scientific reality was very different, because that time, this controversy, there was no mRNA vaccine was licensed for the use in U.S. beef cattle. And the vaccination decision remained within producers. And mRNA does not actually rewrite DNA or survive digestion in the way these claims suggested. So the narrative, whether it is right or wrong, had a real impact, because we know that some jurisdiction already thought about controlling or legislating, right? So the lesson here is important. One is misinformation does not need to be scientifically credible to influence policy or incredible, right? It only needs to connect effectively with identity, fear, and existing distrust, right? So that's you can spread and create misinformation, right? The second case, which is all related to influenza, it shows that as the virus appeared in the U.S. dairy herds, several narratives actually circulated spontaneously. Some people claim that pasteurized milk and beef had become unsafe. Others promoted raw milk as a safe or more natural alternative. And conspiracy narratives also emerge around disease reporting, testing, and possible herd cooling. So the evidence showed that pasteurization effectively inactivates the virus, and that the primary concern involved animal health and occupational exposure rather than a generalized food safety panic. We know this case has had a cross-border health monitoring system, because animals, worker products, and wildlife, all information move from different jurisdiction. If producer distrust disease guidance in one jurisdiction or state, surveillance and response efforts elsewhere can be also weakened, right? And so a coordinated disease response is necessary rather than simply compatible regulations in these kind of cases. It also requires consistent, credible, and trusted communication across borders. So similar messaging we should need. And about the myth and narrative wars, right? And here, about myth and narrative, one group says that major climate villains are those who are livestock producers, right? And the opposite narrative says that, okay, sometimes they dismiss it because, they think that it's an attack on farmers. So there are very opposite, completely opposite views. So these views actually provide us some lessons, right? We know that methane is a significant greenhouse gas, but, biogenic methane behave differently in the atmosphere from, long-lived carbon dioxide. We know that. And livestock system also vary greatly by region, management, productivity, and ecological context. So the advisory challenge here is not to avoid difficult climate conversation. It is to hold scientific evidence and producer realities together. That's the advisory challenge, right? So winning a public argument while alienating producer may actually reduce the likelihood of sustained environmental action, right? We need to think about how we can align the scientific evidence with the producer reality. So that said, beyond fact-checking, fact-checking is important, but beyond fact-checking, we need to think about that this is a relational, this is a structural, and it's political, and it requires systemic response, right? And we develop a framework which we call PPP framework. power, profit, and propaganda. So here, the power refers to who controls platform, institutions, regulation, the visibility of information. It asks whose voices are amplified and whose voices are ignored, right? And in terms of profit, it refers to economic incentives behind the attention. So digital platforms often, benefit when content generates outrage, fear, or conflict because this emotion keeps people engaged. And propaganda refers to deliberate use of emotional narratives, ideological framing, and selective information to influence public opinion. So here the framework, it moves from asking the question, is the claim false or true? It moves from that question and it asks who benefits, who control the system, and why does the narrative continue to circulate? So that's we need to understand, right? If we want to respond to misinformation. And what the structure actually produce, right? The first is increased polarization, that communities become divided around issues such as vaccination, climate policy, and animal welfare. Second, it declined trust in science and institution. Thirdly, it also weakened advisory capacity. When institutions are distrusted and knowledge network become fragmented, it become harder to provide a coordinated support. And finally, science denial and anti-expert sentiment can become a normal thing. It become normalized. So that is why rebuilding trust, requires more than better message. I'm saying more than better message. Better message is needed. It requires attention to institutional legitimacy, platform governance, participation, and the condition under which advice is produced and delivered. And some studies that we have done over the years, it shows that, actually, the first repeated exposure to contested information creates fatigue. Right? And producers and advisory actors may become uncertain about which sources deserve attention. Secondly, people increasingly select information sources that align with their existing values and identities. This fragments the wider advisory system into separate and sometimes, competing knowledge communities, right? A bubble that it creates. Thirdly, hostile and toxic digital environments can push trusted professionals and producers away from online discussion, even from the whole advisory system. And finally, participatory and community-based actually response appear more promising than simple one-way correction. So here, you can see from one of the study we have done, we just got a publication underway. And it shows that, about 43% people in Ontario, out of 52 that we did survey, they are actually leaving different social media channels. So think about if trusted advisory, like especially advisors leave ecosystem, who's gonna actually reveal that trust? The issue is double-sworded, right? Because then there will be people who will be propagating all this information and there is no rebuilding process, right? So we need to think about how we can rebuild that process and, trust and so that, there will be a good response we can think. So I don't know how much time I have. 15. Oh, that's good. I think I'm on time. So here I want to say, I talk about, just to recap, I'm sure I know some of you might feel overwhelmed. I'm sorry for that. I talk a lot of things. So just to recap that, I talk about, extension advisory thing, and about misinformation, but I'm bringing about AI, which is we know that that creates an enormous opportunity, but I want to just say that it also creates a lot of problem, right? So we know about scalability, right? It can really scale out advisory or knowledge dissemination thing. We know it helps to personalize it. Like we can use like AI in terms of varieties, in terms of herd, in terms of climate. We can personalize things. We know it's more accessible, right? It's getting more accessible. And we know it can also provide predictive advisory because data is powerful for sure, right? But at the same time, we know that there is a hallucination is a problem. There is a synthetic misinformation and deepfakes becoming a problem. And we know there is a algorithm amplification, and the issues of data privacy and security is becoming more and more important, especially when we're thinking about use of AI in advisory service. I'm not talking about labor and other ethical issues in that. Like there are also other broader issues that especially in agriculture as well as in other sector. So, but what I wanted to emphasize here that the AI amplifies the value of human trust. And I'm sure like from now and in 3 or 5 years, you'll probably agree with me and or think about someone talked about that because, like as the volume of machine learning content information increases, right? Producer will need help determining what is accurate, relevant, and appropriate for their practical circumstances, right? And for example, a veterinarian who knows the herd can interpret advice in the light of disease history or management, conditions, and the producer's capacity to act on. And that is still AI, there is no AI model that can really do that perfectly. Because as I said, livestock agriculture is very contextual, right? An extension professional who has built long-term relationship can recognize concern that may not appear in a farm data, right? And human intermediaries also provide something an AI system cannot fully provide. Now, what is this thing? Professional accountability. There is no accountability AI, at least for now. If I do mistake, who can I blame? And so the future is therefore not AI instead of human extension. It is what, I think Ethan Malik, who actually introduced this term, co-intelligence. So that means in which technology expands, capacity, it will expand capacity, but while trusted professionals also provide judgment and context, legitimacy, and care. We sometimes forget about the issue of care and empathy, right? That's not a machine can give you always, right? So here I want to conclude that part. That trust is a very multidimensional concept, and it is not about it's not about blind acceptance, right? The key question is not simply how we persuade people to trust in a technology that is AI-enabled advisory system. The question is how to build a system in which trust is a reasonable response, right? So we have to think about the trustworthiness of the tool itself. And here, trust is a characteristics, right? We like different kind of phone, Apple or or Android, right? And we trust that, right? It's the characteristics. The second is trustworthiness of the delivery system. So it's a process. As people interact, as the farmers, produce interact with advisors, they build so many stories. It's a process, right? And the third is trustworthiness of the governance environment, which is trust in institutions. So how you can, is there any accountability, oversight, or data protection that we need to think about? So trust is not simply one-dimensional process. That's what I wanted to say here. And finally, you're thinking about what is the remedies, right? I mean, I know like probably I'm out of time, so I will, so it's easy, right? I don't have any solution for you, but I can give some ideas, right? So we thought about, over the last 4 or 5 years, we thought about platform approach. We call it platform in a social science. We call platform is a social space where people come together and can work together. And it can be in physical, it can be also virtual. So that's why I started with, misinformationresearch.com. I think it's a small fund from Tri-Council. And then last year, we started with KRE. I'm sure like few people, I don't know whether anyone attended our conference last year. We called it Canadian Agri-Food and Rural Advisory Extension Education. And one of the reasons I built KRE, we come forward with that because as I said, like if you think about extension as a system, so in that system, there is education, there is research about extension, there is practice, and there is policy, right? Practice is growing, diversified, and innovating in a Canadian system. No education. When I say education, I'm not talking about training I'm talking about higher education. There is no recognition of research in extension advisory, right? And policy, I don't want to talk much about how extension get, when you talk about more money for extension advisory, right? So that means it's fragmented. So, and one of the reason I think, based on my international experience, because there is no platform to think about extension capacity as a systemic response. There are organizations that are doing great work, but it's very, they're doing their own way, but it's not connected to nationally. It's not also connected to the global scholarship. When I talk about do you know extension? Yeah, I know about land grant system in the US, but we don't, get any lessons and apply in our system, right? So that's why, KRE, we started in October last year, and we'll continue next year too, October 2027. And this October, we are doing a kind of symposium, one-day symposium. So I'm not proposing as a solution. I'm just showing you that, the platform approach can work to rebuild trust. Secondly, for livestock extension, I want to propose 3 pathways, right? One is we need to investigate together. We need to participate locally, and we need to also, govern jointly. That's very important if you want to rebuild, trust in that in a polarized world. And finally, not yet. Like for extension, need some new competencies, right? Especially, think about critical digital and AI literacy. Extension need participatory communication facilitation. The trust building that I'm talking about and conflict mediation is important, and system thinking and government legitimacy. So when I say government legitimacy, you as an extension, your job is not only transferring knowledge or talking to or empathize. You need to talk to your minister and win the, win the support for your cause, the cause of the people. And so extension professionals should be actually a democratic intermediaries. And in this world, right? It's a trust broker, knowledge mediator, strategic communication, facilitator, misinformation navigator, and democratic intermediaries. I don't want to take more time. So that's my concluding part, right? So here I want to, the main thing that I want to tell in this slide that the growth of AI, misinformation, and polarization does not reduce the need for extension. It increases it. Secondly, the extension 4.0 is not simply about adopting more digital tools. It requires stronger leadership, facilitation, participation, and trust building. Thirdly, the work ahead increasingly involves conflict, navigation, participatory governance. And finally, livestock resilience depends on collective capacity. And hope, with this, I could give you some food for thought. I'm sure, a lot of things to think about. And I don't have a ready-made solution. I'm not a practitioner, as I say. I'm not a policymaker. I play with all the concepts, but at the same time, I work with many producer organizations in Ontario and across the world, and I try to understand, how people do the things. And I think that's I tried to do today, and I hope, I could give some message and some thought for discussion.
Well, thanks very much, Dr. Chowdhury, for that presentation. It was excellent. And we do have a few minutes for questions. So I will open up to the floor. And for those who are online, I can't see the Zoom questions, but I'm sure someone can. So please relay them if they're in. Any questions? Go ahead. And I wonder if we can get a mic there. Yeah.
Where's the hand for this?
Hi, Melissa Downing. I'm with Alberta Cattle Feeders Association. So I noticed right at the end you said that it's recommended that this would be democratic intermediaries that would be delivering this. Do you have information on that? Because I'm curious. I was going to ask the question about whether there's it's more effective for industry organizations or those people more maybe integrated into the industry to do it versus government, like which is better was going to be a question I had.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Actually, what I mean as a democratic intermediaries, whether you work in industry, private industry, or whether you work in, in the government, you have to think about, like, if you work in the industry, you're working in a different culture, different requirement, right? And you have a different pressure, right, in terms of meeting needs of your members, meeting the target that you might have if you work in the private sector. If you work in the government, you're meeting different targets. So that means wherever you work, you have to mediate that different needs people, and at the end, see what is the best for your client. So that's what I wanted to say here. It's not, to work. If I say, okay, I'm working on behalf of organization X, and this organization does this, and that did, and I have to do that. No, you have to, you have to do a lot of research. So when I say research, you have to do a lot of thinking. It's not, when I say democratic intermediaries, it's not easy to do. Democracy is sometimes difficult. We know that, right? And but if it is successful, it's the wonderful thing that people enjoy, right? So I mean, Mike, I don't know whether I'm answering your question. My answer is that wherever you work, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, you need to mediate multiple views and multiple interests, and then think about what is the best for your client, right? Which is not only effective but also, ethical, also efficient, right, for your client.
I hear that. And I guess I'm wondering though, from the recipient side, right? And you talk about trust and that the people need to trust and understand where they're coming from. And no offense to anybody from government in the room at all. This, like Dr. Keshwani, this is not at you. But I do think, there is a lot of nuances in our industry, right? Even like for me, from crops to livestock to even within livestock, there's so many things. And there's some of us in the room that work with organizations, and we are very like even me with the cattle feeders, I don't deal with general beef producer population. Like we're very specific and build that trust over years to maybe help facilitate that. Do you think that plays into it? Like, do you think that there's a different level of trust and maybe a different way that it's received by the producers because of those, I guess, more specific relationships we have from our sectors?
So if I understand your question is like whether you see like the trust that you build working with a specific producer group is more is different and if,
Yeah, like have you seen any difference in the value that might be coming from different
right.
specific-
So that's why when I define trust, you have seen like I'm talking about trust as a kind of characteristics as well as process. So yours is what you were talking about, like it's working with the specific communities or community of groups. You're talking about more trust as a kind of bilateral as well as kind of process that you build over the time. But think about like what is about these communities also think about the system itself. So I mean like as an innovation system, your organization is one part. And if we don't build, like think about the government and institutions, and we are not thinking about trust as a systemic response. So your organization maybe work better if you even provide incredible information, like not credible information, they might do it. So then I don't know how we can, that then the trust is a problematic, right? And that's we see, there is a bubble network, right? Like people somehow get siloed.
Well, thanks. We'll take one more quick one, but we will move on shortly.
Hi, yeah, Miles Woke with with producers in the province and stock growers, Alberta beef, whoever you talk to, a lot of the beef producers, probably 70% of the cow-calf sector, very against any new traceability laws or rules coming down the pipe. Most of us brand, most of us, of that group, we look after things that way. We can trace things back if we're along a fence line or anything. Even a lot of the TB trace outs in our area, it was all brands and it was bills of sale. So that's where we're coming from. That's where the trust side of it is. That's my point of view and the point of view of a lot of producers that came to a lot of the producer meetings, throughout. And we've got, with the CCA and with ABP, there's working groups out there that are here to talk, there's a lot of differing views. Feedlots are different than cow-calf operations. We're not going to do the same thing on a 3,000 or even a 500 head cow-calf operation as they do in a feedlot. They use the technology, they use the movements a lot different than the cow-calf producer.
Thank you very much. And you can see like, yeah, well, I mean, thank you for sharing. And you can see how to build trust is a very complex thing. And it takes time, right? And yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks again. Okay, so we'll move on to our next section after setting the stage there. And the next two speakers are going to come from the regulatory perspective. So first, we're going to have one from our Canadian regulator, CFIA, and then subsequently we'll have a state regulator that'll speak. So we're starting with Cathy Furness, who is the Deputy CVO for Canada, as well as the Executive Director of the Emergency Management Group within CFIA. And she'll be sharing some perspectives from that agency. So help me welcome Cathy.
There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. I am very pleased to be with all of you here today and to share some of our agency's experiences in navigating some pretty significant animal health emergencies in an increasingly complex environment. As Hussein mentioned, I'm the Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer and recently appointed the Executive Director of our Emergency Management Branch. And I think, boy, the agency, we've been through some tough lessons lately. But ultimately, I think we have come out to the other side, hopefully stronger, with a more effective animal health response. So it's a very exciting time to be a regulator. We're all trying to, it's exciting stuff. We are all trying to navigate challenges like changes within our agricultural communities. So we have very large commercial operators, but we have a lot more smallholders now too. And everybody has different needs and expectations of the regulator. We're dealing with climate change, and so pests and vectors that we haven't had to deal with before in our Canadian agriculture system, and they're surviving longer because of the changes to our climate. So we're trying to navigate vectors like Asian longhorn tick. We're dealing with very complex and challenging trade, economic, and security environments where our geopolitical challenges definitely influence agriculture and how we do our business. We have a shift in public trust, which Dr. Chowdhury just talked about, where we have that spectrum of individuals who believe wholeheartedly in the science and then others who completely disagree with it. We're dealing with mis and disinformation and how quickly that information travels, and I feel like I am always behind the 8 ball with my information. We're dealing with the emergence of zoonotic pathogens. So pathogens are either behaving in ways we haven't predicted, or we have new pathogens emerging because of human encroachment on their environments. And so all of this to say is that we as regulators, we are in a tough space. And on top of all this, we seem to be in a perpetual state of animal disease response. And so at the agency, we have been responding to high path AI in poultry since December 2021. And at the same time, we have had responses in terrestrial animals, including bovine tuberculosis and Newcastle disease virus. And we've also at the same time had disease responses on the aquatic side of the house. So MSX, dermo, and whirling disease. So essentially, we have no shortage of learning opportunities. And so what I have learned coming out of these situations is that, for me, in my opinion, the foundation of an effective disease response is really built on 3 things, and that's science-based decision-making, communication, and trust. And so I'm going to use some of our recent experiences to highlight how these 3 concepts really do form that foundation. So first off, I'd like to start with the science-based decision-making. And so in our increasingly complex regulatory environment, animal disease response policy needs to be grounded in science-based decision-making, full stop. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And I think that the high path AI in dairy cattle situation is a very good example of this. So spring 2024, very challenging for our colleagues at USDA APHIS, for our US veterinary state colleagues, for our US veterinary practitioners, and for American dairy producers. And it was also really challenging for us as well. So high path AI was behaving in a very unexpected way. I don't think any of us would have predicted that an avian virus would have jumped into a herbivore and then have been so darn effective at causing disease and being transmitted from cow to cow. It was also very challenging for our scientific community because there was little information, right? And everybody was scrambling, trying to figure out how this disease was being transmitted. We had pressures from the public health perspective, and questions were swirling like, is milk safe to drink? How is this spreading? And why are we only seeing this in lactating dairy cattle and not dairy heifers, not veal calves, and beef cows? Isn't a cow a cow a cow? So upon confirmation of this detection in the US, at the CFA, we started our own risk assessment process. And so while we have our internal processes that we were working away at, trying to gather information and figure out what the risk actually was, we were also working and collaborating with our colleagues in the provinces, with subject matter expert groups like the Veterinary Surveillance and Epidemiological Network, industry-led collaborations like Animal Health Canada, and academic-based collaborations through the Public Health Agency of Canada. One of the first things we did was to implement risk-based border mitigation measures, and so those were applied immediately. The CFA required a negative PCR test for all lactating cattle entering Canada, and this was risk-based at the time because when we made that decision, there was no evidence that high path AI was circulating in beef cattle, nor was there evidence of high path AI transmission risk in dairy heifers or veal calves. So this addressed that greatest risk for disease introduction while still enabling low-risk movements. We immediately took a One Health approach. So we had conversations with our public health partners right from the very beginning. We had discussions about what PPE was necessary for producers and veterinarians, but more importantly, what was going to be practical on an on-farm setting. So as you can imagine, public health goes to this degree, and we needed something that was in the middle that would be workable. We also worked to confirm the effectiveness of pasteurization, and we had that important joint messaging to the public that pasteurized milk is safe to drink. We had numerous conversations with industry partners, our One Health partners, our provincial partners about surveillance. And so we talked about what samples do we collect, at what frequency, who would collect it, how do we report a positive sample, what do we do if we have a positive case. And so we needed a system that addressed our objectives of having that early detection and maintaining producer and public confidence, but still be practical and mindful of our resource implications, which were limited because we were also responding to high path AI and TB at the same time. We had a lot of conversations about disease response and preparedness. And so remember, high path AI in dairy cattle, it's a new disease. We didn't have a plan sitting on the shelf collecting dust that we could immediately pull off and kind of dust off a few things and then Bob's your uncle and away we go. We had to start from the ground up. But that was actually really, really helpful for us because we were able to bring experts from across the country, our provincial colleagues, industry experts, and we were able to create a response plan that had that national consistency, would meet national objectives, but was also flexible and agile enough to deal with the realities of what was happening in the provinces, that would work with their animal health legislation, and that adjusted to the needs of the differences in our dairy sector across the country. So what worked well for us with this approach? I think right off, the balanced and risk-based approach to import measures was really important. And so this was really about balancing what we understood about disease transmission and our risk tolerances. At the beginning, we had a whole spectrum. We had people advocating for complete closure of the Canadian-US border for cattle. And of course, that would have had huge impacts, and we didn't want to go there. But on the flip side, we had people advocating we didn't need any requirements whatsoever. And of course, that also would have had huge impacts to our Canadian dairy industry. So our approach to focus on where we felt the disease risk was greatest worked really well for us. Having that One Health approach right from the very start and getting our One Health collaborators in the room was really important. It helped with our understanding. We understood where each one was coming from, what our legislative responsibilities were, and what our risk tolerances were. We had collaboration and we had buy-in. And it also allowed us to keep the zoonotic transmission risk into perspective. We involved our partners in the dairy industry, so including Dairy Farmers of Canada and the Dairy Processors Association of Canada, right from the very beginning. And this was so important because, again, it helps that understanding of one another's perspectives, our limitations, and things that were like a hard stop for us. It helped us build trust right from the start. And it was also really important because it did save us time, because when we were designing our response plans and designing our surveillance plans, Dairy Farmers of Canada and the Dairy Processors Association of Canada were able to say, that's not going to work. That's not going to fly. That's not actually how milk moves within the province. That's not actually how milk moves across the country. And so we weren't designing something that wasn't going to be implementable. And that really helped us save a lot of time. And then, of course, communications, that grassroots communications, producers speaking to producers, veterinarians speaking to veterinarians. Being a science-based regulator is not without its challenges. It can be very difficult because, like in the situation here, the science isn't always available. And so we're kind of learning as we go. Being a veterinarian and being a scientist, we all have different opinions of the science and how it's interpreted and how it should be applied. And of course, the science in a biological system is not perfect, right? The pathogen, they don't read the textbook. They don't always follow the rules. The animal doesn't read the textbook. It doesn't always follow the rules. And so our science isn't perfect in that biological system. And so our risk is never zero. And we have to make sure that our mitigation measures that we're putting in are addressing that risk. We also need to balance influences and pressures beyond the science, including the economic and the political pressures. And we have to think about balancing the impacts to an individual producer, where that hardship is actually going to be very, very real, versus the impacts to an agricultural sector, to the general population, so the Canadian public, or to our economy. And so we have to have those really hard conversations about what's the public good and the public interest versus the individual interest. And of course, there are some pretty negative consequences if we don't follow the science. So when we make decisions not based on science, we lose our consistency and our predictability. You know, we take one response approach on farm A, and on farm B, we do something different. And if it's not science-based or grounded in that science, that's very confusing for the producer. We lose accountability in our decision-making. And at the very, the greatest risk would be that we would lose our international markets because we're not following international policies, which are also based in science. All right, so now I'm going to move on to communication. And this will be a hot topic. So happy to have lots of good discussion about this. So after years, actually over 16 years of consultation, we had a proposed update to Canada's livestock traceability regulations, and that was published in CG1 in March of 2023. And it went through our regular process for regulatory updates, where it was posted, comments were received, we went out and did some feedback, there was back and forth, and those adjustments were incorporated into the amendments. And it was the expectation that these would be finalized in spring 2026, with it coming into force the following year in 2027. However, the updates were paused in January 2026, following the expression of significant producer concern and backlash regarding the amendments. I would say it picked up steam with some misinformation shared on social media. And so following this discourse, we also had some of our producer groups and associations rescind their support for those traceability regulations. And the concerns that we heard from our industry colleagues and our producer colleagues were numerous, including things like concerns about cost, burden of reporting, that the implementation time was too tight, that there were concerns about privacy and how that information collected for traceability would be shared. On social media, we saw themes of government overreach, fear, and threats to personal freedom all throughout the social media discourse. So this pause enabled the CFA to, first of all, slow down, catch her breath, trying to figure out what was happening, to engage and to listen, and to clarify misinformation, and really hear the concerns that were reflective of the current agricultural economic reality that these producers were worried about. So after renewed consultation, we have on June 2nd, we did announce that we would be moving forward with some traceability amendments, but would shelve the amendments related to cattle and bison at this time. So we have numerous lessons learned coming out of the trace experience, and I'm sure that we'll be continuing to learn as we're going through this adventure. I think one of the biggest ones for me was that communicate early and often. And when you think you've communicated enough, communicate more. That we need to make much more time for that in-person conversation and contact. When we met with some of the associations who wanted to have these conversations, the tone and the body language in the room shifted as soon as we were in the room together. And I think we've lost some of that because of COVID, because we now have technologies, Teams, Zoom, so on and so forth, that make things very easy for us. But we really do need to get back to that face-to-face conversation. We need to have a communication strategy or some sort of a plan, a crisis communication plan for misinformation and disinformation in advance. That should be part of every single emergency response package, every single regulatory package that we do. For me, the trace situation on social media felt like it was coming a little bit out of left field. But then when we started to do some further analysis and look into things, it was linked to, or there was some linkage to another file that we had been working on where social media had a lot of challenges for us. I think we need to think outside our usual relationships and networks. We were approached with some questions from a producer organization that really wasn't part of the group that we would normally interact with. And once we clarified and then we had conversations and clarified some of the misinformation, they became really amazing communicators for us because they understood the messaging and they understood the importance of traceability. I think also we need to make sure we're not assuming that the messages are shared and internalized and understood. And I have my mother's voice in the back of my head saying, Cathy, don't assume. So we can't assume that people are opening their emails, that they're reading them, that they're understanding what's important into that for us. And I think this just reinforces that fact that we need to be, or that issue that we need to be communicating all the time. And we need to expand our communication repertoire. At the agency, we love our fact sheets and we love our web pages, but that's not going to cut it anymore because they're slow. We need to be much more on board with social media and different forms of communication. And then I'll just end off with saying that trust is very easily lost, which I think that's quite quite clear. But it can be lost even when you haven't necessarily done something wrong. And it's just that lack of communication, that misinformation. It's so easy for trust to be lost. All right, and now I'm going to move on to our final building block, which is trust. So it's quite clear from research coming out of the pandemic that trust is definitely needed in advance of having so for you to have an effective public health response, and it's critical to counter mis and disinformation. The same would be true for any animal health response. And so from the CFA's perspective, we do need trust so that producers report disease suspicions to us early. We need trust so that we can get on the farm, contain that virus, that bacteria, that problem, get it resolved very quickly so that we can get back, we can reestablish our markets and get back to regular business. Trust is very easy to lose, and we lose that when we have inconsistent messaging or delayed messaging, which I think government were notorious for delayed messaging. We can lose it when we have unclear communications, when there's lack of transparency, that's either real or perceived, when we have perception of political influence, and probably most importantly, when our actions do not align with our words. So I think that our experience with high-path AI in the poultry industry is a very good example of how we started to build trust with our national poultry sector. And I say started because we are still a work in progress. I think that trusting relationship is much better than it was, but we still have a long way to go. And we still have moments on both sides of the house where we have mistakes or we break trust and we have to quickly work to rebuild it. So for Canada, our outbreak started in December 2021. To date, we have had 651 cases across all 10 provinces. And I think many of you will have heard this before, that this event has been unprecedented in scope and in scale. It really was. So for our teams, we were dealing with large numbers of cases happening all across Canada. Often all 4 Western provinces would have numerous active cases all at once. Previously, when we had responded, if we had a couple of cases, we would send folks from Atlantic Canada out west to help out, vice versa. And we couldn't do that this time because we were all responding. And so we had to adjust to this new way of all of a sudden going from where CFIA was used to handling everything on our own to opening up those doors, asking industry, producers, third parties to come in and share some of that responsibility and load of managing high-path AI. And so through all of this, all of these challenges that we were trying to navigate, our national poultry industry, they had concerns about the response. Things were taking too long. Some of our policies were outdated and not reflective of the current industry environment. They were experiencing significant costs. And so what we did, it wasn't easy because we had to shift our culture. We had to shift our way of doing things and our way of thinking. It took a lot of momentum within the agency to get to that state. I would say we're still not 100% there, right? We have some people that are really on board with it and then others that are hesitant. But what we've done is really a lot of engagement and collaboration and communication with our feather industries. And so it started with, first of all, the National Poultry Associations getting together and coming to us as a group as opposed to individual, and having that shared concerns, right? Shared worries. We had meetings between the president and the senior leadership of the poultry sectors to talk about strategic direction and problems that had gotten really big, international export problems, challenges with compensation. We had industry SMEs included in our National Emergency Operations Center technical meetings 3 times a week. And they were providing advice and guidance and thoughts on how we could manage the response better. And this was really important because it helped us develop a feedback loop for our policies. So while CFIA still holds the pen on all of our disease response policies, industry is contributing and saying, this isn't workable. This won't work in this situation. You could try this. This might streamline it. And so that really helps make our policies actually stronger and easier to implement. We were also able to identify those little issues that were kind of niggling and annoying before they became gigantic, disastrous ones. And also, very importantly, it helped everybody understand what our challenges and limitations were, right? And why we were taking these particular actions in the regulatory space, and why poultry wanted something done this way. So it brought those conversations to the forefront. So where are we now? So now we do have a very good, strong relationship across our national poultry sector. And collaboratively, we have tackled some big challenges, including things like recognition of the Fraser Valley in BC as a unique region for poultry production that benefits from a unique approach to zoning and surveillance. We've worked through alternate methods for depopulation, so whole barn nitrogen gassing. We've come to the agreement that we're not going to use other methods like ventilation shutdown plus heat unless there are absolutely no alternatives and there's a public health need. We've identified a path toward using hypotheca or vaccination as a preventive tool. We've identified and addressed biosecurity challenges on premises with repeat infections, and we've identified gaps in our response policy and worked to address them. But where do we have to go next? So next, I think we need to continue that work to establish those relationships with our provincial industry associations and our provincial partners right before we have an emergency. We need to leverage our agricultural networks and make sure that we're collaborating with them and engaging them. Again, focusing on that in-person contact. Yep, no. And we need to be communicating all the time, early, often, and in a transparent manner, and using all forms of communication. And so in closing, science informs decisions, communication helps create that understanding, and trust enables action. And when we have all of those three working together, we do have an effective animal health response. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Furness. I think that, do we have confirmation that Erin Coyle is on Zoom?
Hey, Tahnee, can you hear me okay?
Oh, she is there. Wonderful. So just really briefly in the transition, if you've been coming to this meeting for multiple years, HPI has been, I think, a conversation of significant part for the last 3 years of this meeting. And I don't know, just in the realm of effective communication, there are so many tremendous lessons that can be learned from HPAI. Erin Coyle is the emergency manager for Washington State that's going to kind of continue this thread of conversation. One of the things that I experience as a regulator is sometimes when you stand in front of a people that largely live in the cattle world and you talk about poultry diseases, they just glaze over on you. So if somebody has a cue, like a hint for that, it would be much appreciated. With that, I'll turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, Tahnee. And then am I sharing my screen or is it being presented for me?
I think they have your slides, but if not, you should be able to share based upon how it's structured.
Okay.
It might be easier for you to share, it sounds like.
Okay. It does say that it's disabled to share.
Oh. Haha. 1 second, Erin, they're working on it.
Not a problem.
Okay, now try.
All right. Can you see that slide?
They're saying yes.
Okay. Great.
I think they need to get it shared up on the screen here. Oh, we're successful. Erin, go ahead.
Okay. So we are showing my, not my presenter side, but what you all want to see, correct? The title slide?
Correct. Yep.
Okay,
No,
great.
that's great.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Tahnee, for inviting me to present. In your agenda, everyone, it might say Dr. Idle would be presenting today. She wasn't able to make it, but she asked me to present in her absence, and I'm going to share from Washington some lessons that we've learned in not just that sort of communication and coordination with our stakeholders and our producers and the value of that work with state and federal, USDA and WSDA, but the the vital need that we encountered of coordinating roles and responsibilities with our public health officials and our occupational health and safety organizations within Washington State. I think to that point, before I get started, I will introduce myself. I'm Erin Coyle. I'm the emergency manager for Washington State Department of Agriculture. I work closely with our state vet, Dr. Amber Idle, and oversee all responses that our agency might be involved in, including animal health emergencies and the like. So I will be going over a process that we went through that was led by WSDA to kind of map and analyze systems of coordination between federal and state animal health, which in a high path response has been well understood since, for us, 2022, but then bringing in our state and local public health officials and our occupational health and safety organizations. So before I go into what we went through and why, I am showing you on this slide what I'll be referring to, and it's this playbook found on our website, but it is a simple document that kind of has mapped out lanes of roles and responsibilities between our primary response agencies in animal health, which in the states is USDA, and then the Department of Agriculture, Washington State Department of Ag, and our state animal health official. Alongside activities expected from our Department of Health, our local health jurisdictions, and the labor and industries as well. So this is going to be the visual I'll be referring to throughout the presentation. This document provides an overview of our science and risk-based approaches from those agencies mentioned, and it's designed to help protect our public health and the environment, but has an emphasis on stabilizing animal agriculture and our food supply chain, as well as the economy during a highly pathogenic AI outbreak in Washington State. It was inspired, this process of developing this playbook was inspired by the One Health stepwise process, but also incorporates emergency management principles, including the after action report process. We developed this playbook between October 2024 and January 2025. It was an outcome of this multi-agency group because of some complications that we encountered between all responding agencies to a commercial flock response that we had in that time period. During that time, early in 2024, the presence of high path in livestock became on the scene and created a lot of attention from our public health officials and agencies within Washington State. And it was kind of a wake-up call for Washington Department of Agriculture to see that even though we've been responding to this high path in poultry since March or May of 2022, we kind of had this assumption that everyone else was paying attention to what we were responding to and what we were communicating. But to the point shared earlier in the presentation that preceded mine, we can't make those assumptions that just because something has become incredibly familiar to us, it's not going to be the same reality for others. And that was what we encountered during the first commercial flock detection following the outbreak of high path in livestock, or high path outbreak in livestock in Texas and other states. While Washington hasn't had a positive detection in livestock, it still did cause a lot of concern amongst our partners in our local health jurisdiction and our state Department of Health. The goal of getting together after this complicated response we had in the fall and early winter of 24 to 25 was to not just have this one-time effort, this after-action discussion to see what went well and what could we have done better, but to create a process that we could revisit and socialize often to strengthen the relationships and preparedness across partners. So we wouldn't encounter those same incorrect planning assumptions that we encountered during this commercial flock detection response. Going through this process, we recognize the value of facilitating multi-sectoral coordination, that regular meetings engaging our public health partners with the Department of Agriculture and other environmental sectors improves that communication and coordination. So while we at Department of Ag know that we have strong relationships with our industry partners, we needed to build that with our supporting agencies as well. By having better unity of effort across different levels of government, we found it to be essential to have an actual effective animal disease and response that can be timely. It also is focused on strengthening our resilience for our industries and our agricultural communities, that by engaging not just our levels of government organizations in that response, but by including our local stakeholders in our practices, allowing there to be transparency, not just from the animal health side, but encouraging that transparency to be from our occupational health regulatory agencies and our public health regulatory agencies is just as critical, and empowers our stakeholders to participate in that full holistic disease management process, which also then leads to a quicker and more effective response to outbreaks. So this resource is important to note that that tailored response goals, methods, and approaches are required. So while it was built following a commercial flock detection, and most of those lanes of effort mapped out in the playbook are based off of those lessons learned from that specific response, it is noted that each incident and each response effort is different, and that some methods or approaches will need to be tailored to meet that circumstance. However, the core concepts covered in the playbook are designed and anchored in protecting animal health and the public, and it's applicable across the board for Washington's strategy to decrease the risk of H5N1 transmission to poultry or livestock and protect farm workers and help lower the risk of exposure. The playbook primarily focuses on several critical activities for an animal health emergency response, but it's not all inclusive. So with USDA, there's quite a few critical activities that are mapped out in the USDA APHIS High Path Response Plan, or known as the Red Book. But our playbook focuses on detection, public information, media relations, quarantine and enhanced biosecurity, personal protective equipment, exposure reduction, depopulation, disposal, farm cleaning and disinfection, virus elimination, surveillance, continuity of business, recovery, and restocking. We focused on those topics because those were the intersections where we encountered either confusion or conflict with our other partners that had their own response going. Our public health partners had an independent response related to that detection that we had in the fall. We wanted to better understand and communicate in this kind of post-mortem discussion what are the expectations of each agency during each of those kind of critical activities that we expect in an animal health emergency. We also incorporated several activities that are unique to a public health response, such as the testing of personnel, symptom monitoring and reporting, and then virus infection of personnel and treatment. So having our public health officials explain to us what their needs of our agencies are if they were responding to those activities. And within this playbook, we have approaches and tools that are outlined that are used to manage our resources, information, and data for multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional response, which is really critical because there's a lot of confidentiality to protect that stakeholder, that producer. And there's a lot of conversations that are had of why our agency can't share certain information, even if that public health agency might see a need of additional information. We also outline all of the legal authorities and guidance documents that support why we do what we do. And then there's instructions in the playbook for other states as well as local health jurisdictions or other organizations to use the document as a template and replicate this process for themselves. So this process is built around OSMART, or inspired by. And OSMART is a shared decision-making, action planning, and capacity building process. And it's often used for issues such as animal disease outbreaks or climate change-related health risks and natural disaster preparedness. It's interactive, it's practical, it's adaptable, but it allows teams to map existing systems and identify gaps and design improved workflows without needing to know every step or stakeholder in advance. Because this response we had in the fall of 2024 was complicated and we learned a lot from that response, we knew that just a after action report, which is a typical process for an emergency response, would not have met the need to improve and work stronger next time if we were to encounter a similar situation. So going through this 6-step process where we could define the scope and objectives for each organization with their own mission or response goals, and understand their system and how information flows on the public health side, explain how information flows on the animal health side, helped us kind of mitigate those gaps and bottlenecks in communication that can occur in chaotic situations, with this goal of having improvements designed after we go through this mapping process. Again, the goal is to not just do this once, like a post-incident debrief, but to continue to implement this process and test it to ensure that not just our regular response partners understand our roles and expectations in a response, but that those that we might not have commonly worked with, like a local health jurisdiction that might not have yet had high path detected in their county, that they can understand what we would do in a response and what is expected of them and what our mutual needs are. By going through this feedback process and incorporating after action commentary, it allows us to continue to evaluate and refine and repeat the cycle. When we have transparency and clear lanes of coordination and communication mapped out across levels of government that are invested or involved in a complicated One Health response, it enables us and enhances our ability to share appropriate and timely information with other agencies not immediately involved in the response. Something that we have seen a lot in Washington is the importance of having our public health agencies hold on sharing information if there was a human detection before we're even able to send our own press release. So a big portion of the playbook is discussing and understanding when information is shared, who is the lead in sharing that information for that continuity of effort. Just as when we have a new detection, or when that first occurred in Washington in 2022, it was really critical that we waited for USDA upon official confirmation to announce that first detection, and then we could follow that by our state process with a high path response that's involving a presumed infection in an employee or personnel on site. That kind of pattern needs to follow as well. So when we understand who does what when, it allows there to also be just a streamlined communication to our critical partners, such as the State Emergency Operations Center, when they aren't anticipating duplication of effort, they can just streamline that logistical support that might be needed, might be able to help with policy flexibility or other coordination. And it just easier to mobilize assistance proactively rather than reactively. When we can reduce duplication and confusion, when that known responsible agency is sharing updates through known and standard channels, it helps reduce a lot of confusing data calls from multiple entities and keeps information consistent statewide. It helps us ensure that accurate information is provided, not just to our elected officials, but to the public, because we know in a crisis, as soon as misinformation or confusing information is released, you can't take it back. It can't be reclaimed, and that has a life of its own. So speaking with a unified voice across all responding agencies is critical, and having that echoed through our Emergency Operations Center is equally crucial. After we completed this process, we did have the opportunity to use it for another response. So we had a response in a neighboring county from the one that was impacted in the fall of 2024. And it was a county we hadn't worked with before, but we were able to avoid a lot of the confusion and frustration that was encountered during that initial response, because we could follow this playbook and we could clearly communicate across Department of Health and local health jurisdictions what was expected of all of us, who would be doing what, and we had a nice document to follow. So there's just a lot more efficiency in making sure that we were responding effectively, and that each organization was getting their needs met, but more importantly, that the needs of that producer and the workers on site were being prioritized. So we were able to notify our critical partners directly and immediately. We were able to use those existing relationships that were further strengthened through that playbook process. We knew the type of documentation to share, such as situation reports, to ensure there was understanding of who was doing what. We were able to limit how many meetings needed to occur, have coordinated media relations across all of our agencies, and then be able to uphold those pathways for any questions or concerns that could arise, and respect the confidentiality of our producer. So by fostering our multi-agency engagement, the process creates a more integrated and resilient system that can respond to One Health threats more effectively and sustainably, not just high path, but for other diseases on the horizon that we might not have experienced yet. And that concludes what I have to share, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
I'm sorry, Erin. Any questions for Erin? We've got one in Huva that I might throw out to either Erin or Cathy if you're interested in coming back up. You guys both hinted at it a little bit. I feel like these talks really complemented each other, so thank you for that. What happens if science is weaponized in favor of a political agenda instead of staying objective? Did Erin hang up also?
No, I was hoping not to pull the short straw.
So the question, just to repeat the question, was what happens when science is...
What happens if science is weaponized in favor of a political agenda instead of staying objective?
Yes. So I think as regulators, as scientists, it is our job, difficult job, to sometimes say to our political masters, no, like the science says this is what we need to follow, and do it politely and tactfully. But I think that's my role as a deputy CVO. That was my role when I was with the province of Ontario as a CVO, to say, this is what I think the science is, this is what I recommend, and provide my best advice. And sometimes we do have to go down that road of loyal implementation. But I also I think that it's my job to make sure that I am providing that that grounded scientific advice to the best of my ability, and then make sure that I've captured that, documented that to the best of my ability.
I think that's a great answer.
That is a really difficult
It's a tough
question. It's
question.
your turn, Erin.
Yeah, Tahnee, I can add to that as well. I can speak at least from that emergency management perspective. There is the art of not in an emergency, not putting an elected official in the position of like instant commander. That there is a space that can be held for elected officials to state their interests, their priorities, but have it be contained outside of the actual decision making and response objectives and how we're going to achieve those objectives. Be that those two entities keep separate. And I think what can be a tool to manage the risk or just awareness that is something that does happen. There is this possibility, this tendency to have those that might be in an elected position to want to feel like they should be in charge and in control, and be embedded into the objectives and response decisions. That is something that we expect, and as such can put in processes to help contain that and avoid that scope creep. So putting them in a policy group, in a MACG, where they are establishing their priorities, their interests, they can approve funding for certain response goals and the like, but allowing subject matter experts that are making those science and risk-based decisions to ultimately make the decision around a response. But to the point of how do we further kind of mitigate that or just prepare for that beyond just hoping that can manage scope creep, is having kind of that unification of partners, having multiple subject matter experts agree in that science, having your Department of Health and your Department of Ag and your state and federal entities be that fortified force of reinforcing what is that science-based decision that needs to be followed. That is at least the intention and the hope. There's always things that always end up being lessons learned if we can't get it right the first time.
Absolutely. I think you guys both did a great job of broaching what's a really difficult question. I think we should hold that question, and as we continue through the rest of the session today, and I think in particular when we get into tomorrow, where it's hopefully going to be more interactive, I think that's something that we want to come back and revisit, and I'd love to hear from others that are in the room. There was one other question that was in Huva, and I apologize if I do not get the pronunciation correctly, but Dr. Chowdhury mentioned a career symposium this September/October. Can we get more information on that, including dates? We'll make sure and get that distributed out to the group just for the individual that posted that. So we're 4 minutes, or I guess we're a little bit later than that for breaking. I think what we'll do is, instead of coming back at, what time were you supposed to come back at? 4, 5, 4? If you guys want to come back at like 4:10, we've got a little bit of wiggle room in the rest of the content, so it won't be a problem to take a longer break. So thank you guys for bearing with us, and we'll see you back in a little bit. Erin, thank you.
Thank you, Tahnee.
Okay, so in our next section here, we're actually going to sort of combine the two next sections. So we have input from our participants from livestock industry, and then we have our Deputy Minister of Agriculture here in Alberta. And so we're actually going to have each of them speak and provide their presentations, and then we'll take questions for all three of them after that. So we will start with the beef industry with Brad Dubois, General Manager of Alberta Beef. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Wonderful to be here tonight, or today, this afternoon, as I look out at one of my directors that I know is thinking he can have some fun. So first, again, my name is Brad Duo. I'm the general manager of Alberta Beef Producers. We are ABP, Alberta Beef Producers, is one of 19 marketing boards and commissions that is under Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation. We do collect checkoff, and we represent approximately 18,000 producers across the province. And that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what I'm about to start to talk to as we go into, as we go into my presentation. Again, today I'm going to talk to you about how communications became one of the most powerful leadership tools at Alberta Beef Producers. First of all, again, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this session. And improving communication and trust is a theme I think every organization in this room deals with to some degree. For Alberta Beef Producers, it's been a defining challenge and the defining opportunity of my time as general manager. I want to start with the number 49%. It's a big number. Like some producer organization, our budget comes from checkoff, and the portion that stays with us is voluntary. Producers can request a refund on all or part of what they contribute. 49% was the refund rate when I stepped into the role as general manager of ABP in 2020. Half of our producers were opting out at that time. The easy explanation is economics, but that's only part of it. And we need to recognize that the real issue was not enough producers understood or saw the value of ABP and what it was delivering. It wasn't that we weren't doing good work. It was we were doing good work. It was more around the fact that we were not doing a good job telling producers about the work that we were doing. So when I joined ABP in 2016, one of the constant conversations, I was the marketing manager when I started in 2016, and one of the constant conversations that you heard at board meetings or the delegate body was that it revolved around a problem with our mailing list. But the mailing list was really only one symptom of a much larger issue. One thing I realized throughout my career is communication is not just support function, especially in producer organizations. It's really all about leadership. It's how we build trust, engagement, and support. And when it's not up to par, everything else is weakened. When the GM role opened up, I put my name forward, but I was very blunt with the hiring committee, and I basically said, you know, if you're not interested in making changes to the communications needed at ABP, then this position's probably not for myself. And I wanted to make it a top focus. And it was at that time, the hiring committee was the executive and the board of directors. You know, I guess they agreed. And the decision started the process that's brought us where we are today with the development of these tools since 2020. So here are a couple of key examples of what we've built since that time. First of all, I want to talk about the ABP magazine. It's now reaching 16,000 producers across the province. It's one of the largest in circulation for the Canadian beef industry. And an unexpected benefit from the magazine was that it helped us to improve our producer database. Suddenly, producers started to let us know that they were no longer in the business. They had exited, somebody had passed away, or the case may be. But then we also had the young people or new people, entrants that were coming in saying, we've never got this information before, and they were signing up and providing us with their information. We do a print version quarterly that is sent to producers, and we also make it available online. So you can engage with the magazine either way. Another thing we implemented was ABP Daily. It is our digital content and news platform. It reaches thousands of producers and the broader industry. It started as an app in 2020 or 2021 and then evolved into a website platform. We also expanded our social media presence, keeping pace with how producers actually consume their information about the industry. We also incorporated the bovine, our first podcast, built for producers to listen to while they were in a tractor or in pens or just hanging out for the day. On the internal side, we built tools like the monthly minute and VIP updates. That was for our board and key industry contacts that we can share on a regular basis. But none of these stand alone. Every channel points back to the same purpose, helping producers understand the value of the organization and what we're working on their behalf and what's happening in the industry. Back when I was hired, though, as GM, the board asked me to come back within 90 days of a communications plan. So when I had gone through the interview process and I had talked about what my plan was after the deal, the ink signed, the chair at the time, Kelly Smith Fraser, said, in 90 days, we want to see a communications plan. And I thought, holy smokes, that's going to be interesting. But I worked with an agency called WS. We developed strategies around both a traditional format and a digital format. Since our producer audience had such a wide span of demographics, the board spent a great deal of time discussing and ended up actually choosing both formats. And I think back to that day, and I do believe the deputy minister was there at that time as a director. We had a lot of conversation around how do we reach folks? And we talked about the print being probably the better tool, but that was mostly coming from our more seasoned directors. One's a little more age on them. Those that excuse me, those that were a little younger on the board, they were like, digital is the way of the future. So we need to go digital. But at that time, COVID was taking place. And so the dollars were not, we weren't spending the dollars in our regular budget because of COVID. So we had those additional dollars to invest in platforms. So the board decided, let's do them both. Just lost my train here. The initial plan included a 2-year trial of the print magazine, a digital app that was inspired in part by drovers out of the United States, excuse me, and a renewed commitment to our social media platforms. By February 2021, both the first issue of the magazine and the first version of the app had launched. And it's in my notes here. It was an immediate success. We did feel some pushback. We felt pushback from private magazines that felt like ABP had an upper hand. And there was producers out there that felt like the magazine was assumed that I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Producer-funded organization that published its own magazine, while others assumed it was more about promoting ABP and not serving producers. A lot of them talked about you need to be doing this to the consumer and so forth. And one of the things we talked about is it's so important to talk to our consumers, remind them about the Alberta beef product, but it's as important to market to our producers about the organization. It was a conversation that we started to have on a regular basis at the board table. We stayed focused on our purpose. And the magazine was designed to help producers better understand what ABP was doing on their behalf and how their checkoff dollars were being invested. Over time, perceptions started to change. And within that 2-year period, we found that at our zone meetings, the resolutions were coming forward to keep the magazine, not let it go. And that was the message that was going back to our delegates and to our directors. As our communication strategy matured, we invested in dedicated staff to support the magazine and digital platforms, expanded our social media presence, and launched, of course, the Bovine podcast. What we really have done to make communications not just a part of what we do, but the most powerful leadership tool that ABP has. We invest in it, we resource it, and it's the first thing we turn to when a challenge comes our way. It takes real commitment, and I have to give credit to the board today and the past several boards from 2020 and on, because they kept the pace. Like they kept moving forward, even though there was some challenges and pretty significant pushback initially. But that brings us to where we're at today. And we started with that number 49%. Now we're looking at 32%. That's where our refund rate is now today. 17% lower than it was 6 years ago. Stronger communication since 2021 has played a significant role in that drop. And it's a trend that we hope and expect that we will continue to see. But it's okay, sorry. And it's helped us tell producers clearly how their checkoff dollars are working for them in marketing, government relations, research, and now wildlife. But we have to remember that it all starts with our stakeholder relations. So we gather all the groups together. Those are our main core focus areas, but everything revolves around how we handle our stakeholder relations. A lower refund rate is probably our strongest signal that we were moving in the right direction, but it's not the only one. Across our communication ecosystems, we've seen consistent growth. ABP Daily active users have grown by an average of 97% since 2021. Views are up 49% annually each year over the same period, and our social media channels have averaged 40% growth each year while reaching record levels in 2026. Probably goes back to that traceability conversation. Most importantly, our producer refund rate improved again from 49% to 32% where we're at today. To me, these aren't just communication metrics. They're evidence that stronger communication is helping rebuild the trust, strengthen our relationships, and improve engagement with the producers that we serve. It means we're managing through communication challenges, building understanding between governments and producers, hopefully rebuilding some trust, pushing back against misinformation. It hasn't always been perfect. There's no doubt about that. We struggle with reaching the hard to reach. And I think that's really important. It's those that we're trying to reach, they're hard to reach because they don't engage kind of in anything. It's something that we expect that we'll continue to have to face as time goes on, and we're committed to meeting that challenge. Social media can outpace our staff capacity, and then sometimes information or the misinformation has spread so far by the time that we're able to start to address it that it's gotten beyond where we can really have I think a positive impact, something that we saw also during the traceability conversation. And traceability illustrated that even when it feels redundant internally, there's no such thing as too much communication. We missed the mark initially when the regs hit Canada Gazette 1, with an assumption that all the other previous communication efforts and beliefs still held true, that people knew what we were talking about. But as the conversation grew, we utilized all of our tools and also expanded into external advertising, so print and digital. ABP has all the tools at its disposal, but we decided to also invest in other magazines that circulated in the province and actually outside of the province. We utilized their digital tools. It was about a $10,000 investment. That revolves around the beef code, but it was an extra step to make producers aware. Our analytics so far in 2026 are showing record numbers, highlighted by the growth of ABP Daily and related social media. Today's ABP communications reach more producers than at any point in Alberta beef's producers' history. These are a few of the highlights. This year alone, we've recorded nearly 250,000 ABP Daily views, more than 80,000 active users, and record monthly engagement across Facebook and Instagram channels. These numbers reflect what's happening when communication becomes a leadership priority. One of the things that, yes, as the traceability conversation started to slow or die down a little bit, We've still, yeah, our engagement dropped a bit, but it still remained quite strong, really high, higher than it's ever been in its past. So we're hoping that that's becoming an information source. Technology will keep changing. Producers' expectations will keep evolving, and our responsibility as an organization is to evolve with them. One of the most encouraging developments this year was our board's decision to expand our communications capacity further. A clear signal that communications isn't a support function, it's a strategic investment into the future of our organization. And the board's commitment this year in adding that additional person is going to hopefully just continue to strengthen where we're going with that department. One thing that's been especially rewarding is seeing these tools become resources for the broader industry. We regularly encourage other beef organizations to use the content from ABP Daily and our communications channels to help them inform their own producers. When the industry succeeds, Alberta's producers benefit as well. This seems daunting with an audience that is widespread, with different levels of comfort with technology and extremely diverse opinions and values. Beef producers are fiercely independent, and it can be challenging to frame difficult conversations in a way that comes across as engaging, but without telling them what to do or how to think. Excuse me. People need to feel that they are being heard, and we need to provide them with those opportunities. It's one of the strongest things that we've heard at producer meetings is that producers want to know that their opinion counted and that it potentially had an impact. I keep losing my spot here. Concerns. But it can be hard to sort through all the noise and determine what are legitimate concerns versus people reacting to the rumor mill or feeling like they haven't been heard. We've seen the return on investment in stronger relationships, more trust, and building an organization that stays connected to the producers that it exists to serve. One of the developments that's encouraged us most in seeing our communications extend well beyond our own channels, which is really cool that industry media are increasingly using ABP stories as the basis for their own reporting. Sometimes they publish our stories directly, which we're okay with, or other times they use them as a starting point and then it reverts into their own coverage. We've also had organizations in other provinces ask permission to use and adapt our content. As I mentioned before, it's something that we continue to encourage, and we hope that other orgs find it useful. We're helping to shape the broader industry conversation. Every story now has the opportunity to reach far beyond our own audience and amplify Alberta producers' voices on the issues that matter the most to them. To me, that's one of the strongest returns for our communication investment. And we look forward to just continuing to try and build on it year over year. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much for that excellent talk, and certainly puts in perspective the challenges that our other industries have in comparison where, with a smaller producer group, the techniques you can use to communicate are vastly different when you're trying to deal with such a big population. So thanks very much. Our next presenter is from Olymel. This is Ian Moon, the manager of hog procurement and vertical integration for Western Canada. Please help me welcome Ian.
Is this working? Okay. So I think I'm here because Darcy didn't want to do this from Alberta Pork. I didn't really know exactly what I'd be talking about. And yes, we're definitely a different scale following up the beef guys here, but I guess I need to be able to move my slide too. So like I said, I didn't really know what I was going to be talking about or what I was going to be doing here, but I think that I'm going to be talking about my experience in building trust and my experience in the pork industry. Basically, I'll do a quick introduction of myself. Again, the brief history in the pork industry, and talk about relationships and some examples. So introduction. First of all, for those of you who don't know Ole Mill, we are a Canadian leader in pork and poultry production, processing, and distribution. And our motto is to feed the world. And I am actually the director of hog procurement and vertical integration, which means that I work on hog supply contracts in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I manage the hog procurement team. I coordinate the plant with independent and integrated hog supply, and more recently now working on hog production contracts as well. That will be the last colorful slide that I have. I'm going to start with a quick anecdote about myself, my background. I landed in the hog industry by accident. I was actually in university studying computing science, and I took a summer job building a database for hog producers when they wanted to study practices that introduced PSE, or pale, soft, exudative pork, which I can barely still say 20-some years later. I didn't know anything about raising hogs. I didn't know anything about PSE, but I studied material on PSE. Why did that move on me? Studied material on PSE and production practices. I built up a questionnaire. Before going out to producers, I took my draft to some, we're going to say industry specialists on here, but it really meant the CVO, but this was a long time ago. And I met with a vet there, and they said, this is great, but nobody's going to answer any of these questions. Well, I met with producers at their tables and over the phones, and I got 95% completion rate. And that experience has basically informed my approach ever since with dealing with producers. Okay. Quick history. Alberta Pork was a single desk. It had many plants, many more producers. Transition to open marketing, the formation of Alberta Pork, multiple marketing organizations and direct marketing. There was still a limited relationship between plant and producers, except for a select few. There was probably twice as many producers as there is today. But our current approach, which really began about with my formation, or when I came on to Ole Mill, was a direct communication approach with the producers. This isn't to say that we eliminated the use of marketers or said you couldn't use a marketer or anything else, but that we would start to develop a direct relationship with each of our producers. Now, to be fair, on the scale question, I'm talking about 70 producers, not thousands of producers. So this is something that can be individually managed with a small team. So direct communication approach, it's personal. Nearly all of our communications are to a closed group, whether that's the transporters, through the marketers, or the suppliers, or an individual enterprise. We push communications. We don't expect people to pull them. We keep a limited number of channels and keep a limited number of communications, which is to say that, yes, I use the phone a lot. I email, we letter. We still have people who use fax, believe it or not. And no, we don't use WhatsApp. We don't use Facebook. We don't use LinkedIn. We don't use Twitter. We do a lot of in-person events. Basically, it stays personal. I will say some of our stuff gets put on WhatsApp and retranslated, sometimes not for the better. So why in person? Let's producers have their say. And I think we brought that up. They really want to be heard. Lets us have our say directly with those people without an intermediary or somebody else putting out other misinformation or interpreting it to their designs. It hasn't always been sunshine and roses. When I started, it certainly wasn't. There was a campaign against us as the major packer in the province. But again, giving them their say made the biggest difference in changing minds over time. I can't actually see my notes. Is there a way for my notes to go up and down here? I'm probably missing some things, but I'll be a little quicker so we can go home. So I guess it's okay. We had this COVID experience, which many producers told us is actually the time when the relationship with the producers changed significantly. We were helping out other plants as much as we could because in the pork industry, when those pigs don't ship, it becomes a real big problem. We didn't punish or take advantage of any of those producers who are in a tough spot. We thought we'd actually made it through without a significant shutdown We just come through Christmas, and it was basically coming to February, and we thought for sure if we were going to have an outbreak, it was going to be right after Christmas when everybody was getting together. And we got to February, thought, yes, we made it. And in the middle of February, we had the biggest shutdown requirement. We were shut down for nearly 2 weeks. Through that, those relationships that we previously built, I think I spent 2 weeks talking on the phone the entire time, telling producers what they can expect coming up, what they can expect from us, what they can expect. We also worked with Alberta Pork and the provincial government in terms of trying to figure out what exactly we would do with 100,000 extra animals that had accumulated in the 2 weeks' time. Basically just assisting producers understand their situation and what could be done short-term and long-term. We do a lot of industry engagement. Like I said, sponsorship, attend annual industry events, Alberta Pork Congress, Swine Tech Workshop, which is more of a producer-oriented event, SAS Pork Symposium, Banff Pork Seminar. We participate with Alberta Pork extensively. I would say more than most other packers. I'm the one who shows up at all the Alberta Pork annual meetings. Well, the annual meetings are well attended, but the semi-annual meetings, which we have 4 of throughout the province, I make the drive to all of them. We participate in industry partner events, whether that's marketer AGMs, industry barbecues. We host our own meetings. Again, we have a captive audience. The hog procurement team is constantly working with all the producers, and so we're well known to everybody. I do think that Alberta Pork and SAS Pork make up an important part of the puzzle for us in working with the industry. It's collaborative relationship, functional and trusting, which it wasn't always. We definitely collaborate on quality assurance programs. We trust them to be a representation to government, a representation to the public. And I think that works for a couple of key factors. Number one, they're not a marketer, they're not a board, so they're staying out of the business deals, which allows us to work on all those other things without any friction. Again, quality assurance, health, public relations, government representation. I will say that producers have wanted to blur the lines. You know, as the buyer on the other side, I can see them wanting Alberta Pork to take a political stance on things. I think that it's wise that we can continue to work collaboratively by not taking too strong a stance that way. I actually didn't know that the beef levy was refundable too. I actually think that's a big strength, that it is actually refundable. I know it can pose challenges. I'm sure it's posing challenges for you too, but it really ensures the credibility because that levy must be earned. And there's no question what your intentions are, who you're working for, on whose behalf you're working. It works a bit more for us as an integrator because we happen to also pay levy. So we pay levy as a producer of pigs, which does mean that as a pack, we're getting a little bit of insight that way as a packer as well. Where I put it, but I might have missed the note. A lot of our company has actually served on both the boards of Alberta Pork and SAS Pork, which I think gives quite a bit of insight into what's going on there. Another thing that's come up a few times that we've seen here is working in out of wartime or in the comfort zone, and so doing preparedness planning and things like that. I was with Keith, but I'm sure we'll do it again here. Allows us to learn each other and know each other before the actual emergency comes, and allows us to build those relationships for the times when things get difficult. Some examples just of coordinating our message with Alberta Pork. So, and I'll talk about this maybe as a producer a bit too, or as an observer, I suppose, of Alberta Pork. So the code of practice for the raising of animals in group sow housing got changed to 2029. And for quite a few years, I've been hearing from producers, oh, they're just going to change the date of that again. And, you know, we started saying, no, we don't think that's going to happen. Started talking about it with Alberta Pork. And I guess 2 years ago, we decided it was time to take on a campaign to address this. And the first thing was, I guess, that producers were not happy to hear that they weren't consulted with the code changes in the first place, which once again just had CPC coming out to hear that. I think that was actually step number one. Step number two was a year later having them come back out and say, well, look, guys, this is going to happen. There's not too much we can do about it at this point. Like, we've heard what you've had to say, but this is going to happen. And then from my own perspective, just reinforcing that message to producers that no, it's going to be required and we're going to require it as well. And so you need to start thinking about what you're going to do. And then we actually brought the industry together in a series of meetings with experts in terms of what kind of work they could do, what they could expect to get that done. And I really, in the last year, have seen a significant change in minds. And of course, things have been a little better economically, so that makes things a little easier. But the number of producers who are taking this on or planning to take this on has really increased. Just another example of collaboration or the value of attending these meetings. So we've had a series over the last, 5 or 6 years of PEDV outbreaks, porcine epidemic diarrhea. They just pop up, and there's been no definitive smoking gun, we'll say, for where this came from, but there seems to be a high correlation with some use of some higher risk products for biosecurity purposes, higher risk to our commercial herds. Producers requested that we, being the packer, limit our own producers from using these products. All of our producers were presented with this contract amendment and agreed not to use I don't think I did that. Agreed not to use that. And so we've got 100% compliance, basically. And I know that this is in support of some of the additional work that Alberta Pork is going to do to try and get limited use of these products throughout the industry in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And lastly, I know we're a beef place, so put some pork on your fork. That's it.
Thanks very much, Ian. So we'll go to our last presenter before we then take questions for all three of them. And so coming up is Deputy Minister Jason Hale, who's Deputy Minister in our Ministry of Agriculture here in Alberta. DM Hale has lots of background to draw on, but comes from the beef industry, and I understand also has done some bullfighting in his time. But he has been our Deputy Minister, I believe, since October of 22. So help me welcome DM Hale.
Well, thanks, Hussein. And you can see from my notes, I thought it was a panel discussion. So for a 15-minute presentation, I was scribbling in the back there. But yeah, I'll just maybe start by, everybody knows the markets. Everything's looking great. The beef industry, pork's up. The grains, yeah, they're steady. But man, beef prices are crazy. But we've got FMD, ASF, TB, New World Screwworm, lumpy skin disease, chronic wasting disease, avian influenza. There's so many factors that we have to be careful and watch for. And that's where, the work that we do with our friends to the south, with our friends, in Alberta to the east and west, we have to be vigilant. We have to really be careful of what we're doing. There's so many things. So as a government, as Hussein mentioned, when I started in October 22, coming from ABP and going to some of the NCBA conferences down in the States, really was aware of FMD and the possible effects to the beef industry in North America. So I think one of my first meetings with my team is like, okay, what are we doing for FMD? What's the preparedness plan? And they're like, no, don't even worry about it. I'm like, whoa, okay. All right, now we're going to worry about it. I had a meeting with the federal deputy minister about a month in, and I said to him, I said, okay, what's the federal plan working with CFIA on FMD? He goes like, what is that? Not a clue. Hadn't even heard of FMD. The federal deputy minister of agriculture. So we had a lot of work to do. So working, with my team, with the chief provincial vet at the time and our primary agriculture division, we went to work. We have, what's called federal, provincial, territorial meetings, all the way from the working level up to the minister level. So I was pretty vigilant beating on the deputy's desk federally, and every single FPT meeting that we had, it was brought up, and it started to become a common language. It was a topic that we talked about all the time. Even, fast forward a couple of years ahead, we ended up with our national vaccine bank, the Canadian Vaccine Bank for FMD. 2 years before that, nobody had even heard of it. They weren't even talking about it, but it was happening down in the U.S. So, we thank our U.S. Neighbors for continuing that conversation and actually continuing to bring it to the forefront. Some of the other things we're doing, ASF, we talked about ASF. That was more prevalent. We had many discussions at the deputy level, the working group level, and the minister levels on preparedness. What are we going to do if it comes? How can we keep it out? How, we know that the borders are going to close, but how can we minimize the length of time that the borders would be closed? That's where we come into the zoning agreements. So through work on tabletop exercises down in Ottawa that we were involved with, we started, okay, well, what do we have to do to save that industry, to prepare the producers, prepare the public, and prepare our trading partners if and when it comes? So I mean, there's been, a lot of work and a lot of money put aside, because we know it's, there's animal welfare issues. There's workers, you got to pay your feed bills. There's their mental health aspects. There's so many different aspects that take into place and to look at, when there's one of the programs we looked at was the surplus hog management program. So because if the borders are shut, the factory's still going to keep going. So what are we going to do with that? One of the things we did learn, way back in the early 2000s when we had BSE, and it was thanks to the public that there was a huge campaign, eat beef. The beef is safe. And we know we can't eat our way out of a problem, but we know that it sure can help. So there's things that we can do. So, the communication to support our producers. One thing that we've done in the province too, just this past year, to help with ASF and the zoning agreements, one of our major trading partners on pork is Japan. And they said, hey, we're not signing any zoning agreements while you guys have wild boar in your province. We had 17 wild boar farms, I think, in the province, and we came out with a program. Okay, we're gonna, we couldn't make it mandatory, but it's a voluntary buyout. We're gonna pay you really well to get rid of those wild boar. And then also we had regulations put in place where they had to have specific fencing. We're gonna pay you for the fencing. So we paid a lot of money. It was just over $3 million our province did. We put towards the wild boar farm buyout program because we knew how important it was to our trading partners to be able to prove that we can actually contain a disease if it comes into the province. One of the other things that we've done, with the elk farms, with the chronic wasting disease, we used to export a lot of our the big nice bull elk for either breeding or hunting down to into the U.S. I think there's 30 U.S. states that have hunt farms, harvest preserves, we call them, not hunt farms, harvest preserves, that have harvest preserves. But because of chronic wasting disease in part of our province where, the southern half is classified as endemic, so it's there. The USDA wouldn't allow the importation of any of our elk. So what do we have to do to help those those producers in the province? We don't have a lot of them, but they're important. So we went to work, and there was a lot of meetings and discussions, communication with partners. What can we do? And working with the Elk Commission, we decided to pass some regulations and some laws to allow harvest preserves. Is it going to work? We'll see. We just announced working with the Elk Commission the regulations this I think at the end of June. It was the end of June. I keep looking at him saying, because he's my chief provincial vet, so he's way smarter than me about this stuff. So we brought forward the regulation. So we'll see in the fall if it actually helps. We're trying to think of things that we can do. So when I talk about our commissions in the province here, we have the it's called the Marketing of Ag Products Act. So we have a board that actually looks after all. We have 19 commissions in the province, from beef, dairy, pork, chicken, eggs, elk, a number of them. There's 19 commissions that we regulate through agriculture and irrigation in the province. So we represent a lot of different aspects, and it's up to us as the government and the regulators and the lawmakers to allow them to do their job, allow them to expand. We hear a lot across the United States and Canada. The average age of the farmers it's getting up there. We're all getting older, and it's tough for that young generation to get involved. So what can we do? Part of that is let's make it easier. We know it's expensive. It's hugely expensive, but we have to have that backstop. So we have to be able to provide some sort of safety net. So in doing that safety net, we come up with our business risk management programs that are federally, provincially shared across the country, and that provides that backstop. We work with, between the CFIA, between the PRD, which was the new name. They regulate through Canada Health what we can do for pesticides, herbicides. We're trying to make a lot of changes that will decrease the regulatory burden on our farmers and ranchers to allow expansion, to allow them to do their business, because all of our expenses are going up. These risks, everything's getting closer and closer. And if you're a young person, you're gonna step out and spend a couple $1 million, or more to get started or to take over the family operation, that's a big gamble. So we as government have to do what we can to minimize the risks. I mentioned the CFIA, and I understand there was some talk about traceability before, but that's one of the things that's very important. So the previous minister and I, we've been to many different countries talking about our products. How can we provide a safe, quality product that they want to buy? The U.S. is our biggest trading partner. Always will be, no doubt. I mean, that's where we focus. But as an export nation, we export 50% of our products are exported. We can't put all our eggs in one basket, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know. With yesterday we had the tariff announcements. It depends on the economy. The dollar exchange is huge. There's many cattle that go back and forth across the border. It's a marketing tool. Is it dry down there? Is it wet up here? Is it dry up here, wet down there? What's the dollar exchange, the feed availability, the pen space? There's so many different aspects that in order for us to provide that assurance, we need to be able to provide proof that we're safe, that our product is the best. When we were the minister and I were in Japan a couple of years ago, and talking to some people, and we were promoting Canada. They called it Canada Alberta beef. We had some restaurants and some stores that we were at, and they said, "Oh, Alberta, like is that Banff? Is that anywhere near Banff?" They didn't know where Alberta was, but they knew where Banff was, and they loved that vision of the mountains and the clean air, the clean water, the clean land, that vision of healthy, sustainable food. Another quick story: we had a contingent from Mexico up, and they went to tour the JBS plant in Brooks, and my ranch is just outside of Brooks. So they stopped at my place on the way back, and we were in my shop. The bus came there, and we went for a little bit of tour out in the field and saw some irrigation and a few cows. And we came back in, and we were having a beer in the shop, and I had a sign on my wall, and it was VBP Plus certified. And they're like, "What is that?" I said, "Well," so I explained what VBP Plus was. It's that certification that we can prove that we provide that quality of product. And they were so interested. They were all stores, distributors, restaurants there. So it's real. It happens. So we're going to continue to work with the CFIA. We know there's got to be some changes. The rollout was not very good. I spent about 2 days on the phone getting yelled at. But it's something that we need. We need to be able to find out where these diseases are. Perfect example, TB. We've had some TB issues in between Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. I'm hearing from individuals involved that if we would have been able to find maybe more of that movement in, that traceability movement in, we could have maybe determined a little bit quicker. We've been pretty lucky with the quarantines. There's not a lot of quarantines that we're on for a long period of time. So there's some changes we need to make, but there's things we need to do. With all of these different diseases getting closer and closer to our country and to North America, that added pressure, we have to do more. I'm a producer. I'm a cow-calf guy. I'm a fourth generation. I got 2 sons in it. I got grandkids that are, they come out and ride the horses and chase cows. We know we have to do more. We just can't sit back and just let things happen. So it's a team effort. It's going to be, between us as producers, us as a provincial government, the federal government. It's that, I think Brad talked, his talk was about communication. It's about that communication. We can't have one piece of that pie go out and dictate what's going to happen. It has to be a team approach. It has to be everybody at the table, everybody making these decisions. And that's how you sell it. I learned a long time ago that the government doesn't tell people what to do. The government can try to tell people what to do, but they're not going to do it. If you look, we're talking about different techniques, farming techniques, or ranching techniques. If you see your neighbor doing it across the fence, you're like, oh, how come his crop is way better than mine? What's he doing? You talk to him, you find out. But if the government would have came to me and said, hey, you need to do this, it's like, take a hike. You're the government. I'm smarter than you. But it's that team approach. We have to continue to work together and come up with ideas. We have, between the minister and myself, we go out and meet with stakeholders all the time. We meet with, when we're touring across Canada, we're talking, what are you guys doing? We talk with our colleagues at these different meetings. What do you do? What are you seeing? What are your producers saying? It's that teamwork. We have to be able to rely on each other, what works and what doesn't work. When we go to, perfect example, we were down at the FPT, we did a tour in Nova Scotia, and we went to some blueberry farms and a strawberry farm, and they were drip irrigating all their strawberries, and they were talking about moving into New Brunswick and buying land there, and that the New Brunswick government wouldn't give them any irrigating permits or licenses because they were all drilling wells. So just happened to be, I was standing by the Minister of Agriculture for New Brunswick, and I said, how come you guys aren't capturing any of your runoff, your water, and allowing irrigation? He's like, well, I don't know. We never thought of that. He said, we just don't want people drilling wells. I said, well, I tell you what, you come to Alberta and I'll take you on a tour. I'll show you what we do. And he's like, absolutely. He's coming to Tri-National. He's going to stay an extra day, him and his deputy. We're going to go on an irrigation tour. I'm going to show him. We have to have that open mindset to be able to learn from each other and not be offended, but to learn. And that's how we're going to continue to evolve and to accelerate our business. And there's so much good happening in agriculture. It's the place to be. It's everybody, in Alberta, we're oil and gas. We're an oil and gas province. But I tell you what, everybody that works in the oil and gas, those families need to eat. And we're the ones that are going to be able to provide them that food. So it's a good, it's a good message to take back to wherever you're from, wherever we're going, is pick up the phone and call. If you have any questions, if there's any concerns, if you have ideas, if you see us doing something that you have a better idea, phone. Let us know. It's that relationship building. So these are great events to meet people, to integrate change cards and just kind of be, befriend everybody and move on and do what we can. So rambling there a bit with my 15-minute note presentation, but I hope I covered everything, and I'd sure be happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Jason. Actually, if you want to stay up, I think what Tahnee and I are going to do is let's do a quick impromptu panel for the three of you and just take questions. We got about maybe 20 minutes to go. So if Ian and Brad want to come on up, and I'll let Tahnee run the questions, and I'll maybe run a mic around.
Jason, that's me calling. Is that you? Darcy, no questions.
Any questions from the group that would like to kick it off, or we have one we can carry over from the Hoover app that everybody really liked earlier.
For both, but I'll try and limit it. Got to know where to start here. Hi, Stephanie Smith, Chief Veterinary Officer for Province of Saskatchewan. Thanks to the three of you for a great way to kick out the evening here. Maybe I'll start with Brad and Ian, thinking about where we have gone, particularly with traceability, with lacking trust. It hasn't just been government that's lost trust of producers, it's also been the associations. And you've talked about kind of the positive angles you've taken, where you're going. So I'm curious if you have kind of some specific advice or next steps that you think about for other provincial boards that are struggling to regain that trust. And in that same space, what feedback would you have for provincial and federal government on where do we go next? What are those actions we should be taking before we move ahead with regulation, with other things? How do we actually start to rebuild that trust based on the positive feedback that you've had?
Wow. Okay, let's start with the first part. I want to step back. I think as we went through our producer meetings over the course of January and February, we have 15 producer meetings that start from the top of the province down to the southern part of the province. Our first meeting was in Lacrete, Alberta. I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with Lacrete, but it's about 2 hours from the Northwest Territories. But we have a really significant beef population in that area. It's a very advanced community, but they were mad. And then High Prairie, Grand Prairie, that trend continued down the province. As we moved through and we were trying to help them to understand more information, what we were learning was that we've got a massive kind of groundswell of a fundamental, I don't want to call it a misunderstanding, but to some degree it was. And to try to get out in front of that at that point was going to be impossible. We recognized, I want to say by about mid-January, because it didn't start in January, it actually started in December. And that's where we had that first meeting where we joined, actually, the Saskatchewan Board of Directors joined the Alberta Beef Board of Directors, and together CFIA and CCIA, so for those that aren't aware, Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Canadian Cattle Identification Agency. One, CFIA is government, CCIA is a producer-run organization. Producers had forgotten all of that. Everything was government, everything was bad, everything was angry. We lost the fight by mid-January. What we were trying to do is get into damage control and slow the anger. By the time we had our town hall meeting, which was public to everyone, we had everyone there but CFIA. At the time, that was the right decision. With all due respect to CFIA, it wouldn't have been a good place because we were trying to get to the root or the crux of the problem. So I'm trying to get to your question of what did we learn? When we would come out of that town hall, my beef production and extension staff team member is here with me, Karen Schmidt, as well. She took all of the questions. I'd written down notes, like page after page after page. She took them all and she bucketed them. And we went to our producer meetings. And from that, we took it back to the delegate body. And from there, we decided we got to slow down. We got to stop. And we need to reset on everything, even though we knew we were not that far apart on the things that producers were okay with and what they thought they were angry about. But it seemed after the moment we announced we were going to build a traceability working group and we were going to kind of do a reset, everything calmed in Alberta. That's not the same for every province. Saskatchewan still has struggles, but in Alberta, it seems to have calmed a bit. Our traceability group has met, and we have people on both sides of that, of the conversation. We also have the Alberta government chief provincial vet staff are there, as well as CFIA. And it was amazing when we talked, everybody just talked to each other. CFIA was suddenly no longer the enemy. They were relating, and they were out of Ottawa, so they were on virtually, but the connection and the laughter and everything, the temperature just kind of cooled. We spent a day just getting it on the table, and then they mapped it. And there's all the black stuff that's current, and they put in the new regs. There were like 3 or 4 red marks. Now, I'm not saying that there doesn't need to be changes. There will be changes. We needed to listen to producers and the concerns that they had. And that's the biggest thing is I feel like eventually most producers, not all of them, felt like they were heard. And that's kind of going back to what I talked about. I'm sorry, that was a long way to get there, but it did come full circle for us. It doesn't mean that there isn't rough rides ahead, though.
I'm with the government, trust me. So one of the things that we've been working with CFIA on is so they want a national program, but the provinces across Canada aren't all the same. So in Alberta, we have the premise identification. So that's a law. You have to have a PID. And in order to get the CCIA tags, you have to have a PID. But the PIDs are important. And a lot of it, we use those in the north. So when there was forest fires the last few years, we can look at the map and say, okay, well, the fire's here. We've got these registered premise identifications. We can't tell exactly what's on them, what the numbers are, what they are, but it actually gives us an indication, you know, the way that fire is moving, who's in that line. We can work with the agricultural fieldmen, the counties, then and say, hey, look, you know, like you better get a hold of your producers. Like, you know, we had the numbers or the names, sorry, of each producer and their properties, and like get ready. It really helps us. If you look at, you know, what we have in Alberta, with our livestock identification, our brand, the manifest, most of that information that they were requiring is on the manifest, but it's paper. So we're working, how can we make that digital? How can we make it easier? Because, you know, if you're going to make changes, you got to make changes so it's easier. You know, if you're going to have people do more, it's got to be do more, but an easy way. So we're looking at what we can do with electronic manifests, you know, making some changes with the CFIA on what is required. But it's, you know, that was kind of the misconception is we weren't really asking for a whole bunch more. Feedlots 1,000 head and over already report move-ins in 7 days. And there's a lot of feedlots in Alberta over 1,000 head that isn't gonna affect them. They're already doing it. You know, it's the smaller cow calf producers. That's what we have to help. And that was the frustrating part, was the way it got rolled out. It got so much misinformation got spread. And then once that ball gets rolling, that's why we talked to Dr. Kochar, the president of CFA, and said, you know, and Minister McDonald, like, we got to shut her down, you know, because that ball just got rolling down the hill and just got out of control. So we're going to end up in a good place. You know, I think we're going to get there.
I get to answer your question slightly differently. First of all, I think it's pretty clear from my presentation. I think that there's no substitution for the in-person meetings that you do them. Second part of your question, how to disseminate those information. I think that I would lean on people who've already made those relationships and that trust and try and partner with them for disseminating the information or decisions you want to make. And so trying to make a unified voice on group style housing or a unified voice on PEDV, eliminating, we want to, as an industry, we want to stop utilizing this product. As a packer, would you support us in doing that? And the answer was yes. I think partnering to get a unified voice throughout the industry is really the way to go. And on the traceability front, I will pose a question here to our CVO. How how useful was our traceability? So we've been doing traceability in the pork industry for 15 years. I was actually on the traceability committee 15 years ago. Yes, we're still using paper, but we made the paper easier than what we had before. But how valuable has it been for our 4 or 5 cases of PED for determining where did that potentially come from or not, or other things that, for getting our trade agreements done for zoning, et cetera. These are invaluable tools for us, and we export a lot of pork to Japan, especially. So, well, you can answer how useful it was. I'm going to guess it was very useful.
Yeah, no, actually, that one's actually relatively easy question. It's very useful. I think one of the things is, as in diagnostic tests, a negative result is a result. So one of the things we can show very quickly is where have there not been pig movements. So while we haven't identified the movements that may have brought it into the farm, we can say very quickly who's at risk from pigs that may have moved from that farm in the incubation period prior to that. And so, pork's a little bit unique in that the board does the actual administration of the provincial traceability system. So I think on the line right now, we have one of our staff that's heavily involved with it as well. And so very quickly within, minutes of a detection, being able to get spreadsheets of every pig that's moved, within weeks prior to that is invaluable to be able to tracking it. So.
I'll keep going. She didn't take it from me yet. You may want to at the end. I was thinking about kind of more of a government lens one, but I'm curious as well across the three of you if you have feedback too around kind of rebuilding that trust and also helping get information out on government's role, because I certainly have experienced a lot over the past while over that just huge gaping hole in what people understand of government, what the role is, and kind of to your points, Deputy Minister, there is a lot that goes on, and we have such a role of advocacy to federal government, of alignment, of listening to producers, of putting in what makes sense, and our powers do not go as far as people seem to think they do. And there's certainly no drones with guns on them that are going to shoot ostriches. So how do we start to bridge that gap? Sorry, ostriches had to be said. Sorry, CFIA. I had to break the ice. How do we start to bridge that gap of getting that information? Because I think you've talked about some of that original history was missing, right, Brad, in terms of where did we get to on traceability? To me, it almost seems it's further than that of what on earth is the role of government? What do we do? What don't we do? And how do we do our jobs? So curious for your feedback there, from that producer to government and from yourselves, where do we bridge some of those gaps?
Well, I think it starts on that communication. It's on those meetings. So we have, as I mentioned, the 19 commissions. We have our marketing of agricultural products board that works directly with those commissions. That they're the conduit back to the government. With our chief provincial vet and his office, what issues are they hearing is back to government. It's I'm going to say something, and I'm not going to try to tick people off, but as producers, we have to do more ourselves. Like, we have to pay attention. It's like all of a sudden, like there's not just on traceability, but there's been other areas that, things happen, and it's like, well, why didn't I hear about that? It's like, we've been talking about it for 2 years, but you're not listening. You got to do your own research. I mean, that's a totally different one. Example, somebody was talking about the budget, the provincial budget. Well, how come I never had a say? Well, like, it's been all over the radio. It's been all over social media. Here's the link to put your comments in on the budget. Don't get mad the day after the budget comes out when you haven't voiced your opinion. We need to hear from the producers. So that's why we meet. That's why we have regular meetings with our commissions. Who is the voice of the producers, whichever sector they're in. The previous minister, and I know this minister because she was chair of Alberta Barley, then Alberta Grains. She's tied into producers. So it's we know we're not the smartest people, even though sometimes we like to pretend we are. We're not the smartest people. It's the producers. It's the boots on the ground. It's the decision makers that are dealing with it every single day, whether they're companies, whether they're producers, or whether they're commissions. And that's where we have to rely on the commissions to bring that voice to us. They're legally they're part of the government, and they're the voice of whatever sector that they represent.
I want to come back to, it's all going to revolve, I think, around time. It's going to take a long time to rebuild, I think, the trust at the federal level specifically. There was definitely more of, I would say that, as we traveled from producer meeting to producer meeting, it was like more of a provincial or, kind of a government of Alberta type approach. But at the same time, still a lot of concerns around what they are doing is complete overreach. I know how to run my program. And it's going to be challenging to get beyond that because nobody's trying to tell them how to run their operation. What we're trying to do is make sure their operation is there for years to come. But at the same time, we didn't approach it properly. And again, when it comes back to the producer meetings and the face-to-face that you were talking about, it seemed like over the months, we could slowly lower that temperature as more people seem to be able to get their frustration out. So face-to-face is, I think, for sure. I never said the word ostrich so much in my life at producer meetings over the course of 2 months. I couldn't believe it. So bad. But I just feel like I'm just forgetting if I'm missing a part of your question there, but I believe it's time that is the main thing. And there's going to have to be a recognition, I think, when I deal with my counterparts or Karen's counterparts with CFIA or our CVO, we have very, very strong relationships. But when you now take a producer that has had, and may have never even hardly said the word CFIA, and you put someone into that operation who is maybe not as versed, struggles with connection, sometimes there's maybe a feeling of a little bit, no, I'm in charge here, no, I'm in charge here. And you automatically have these situations that happen in the yard that spreads like wildfire through the producer community. And we have to do a better job of making sure producers understand what's about to happen, but then also the people going in, and I'm not actually blaming the CFIA, I'm blaming the people, not him, but kind of him, because if they're not funding them properly, we don't have enough people, blah, 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 there's this rolling effect. So there's lots of things that we need to do, I think, to improve it, but it's all going to revolve around time.
I'll just quickly say that I think it's pretty clear we think there's a role for government, especially if you just talk about the wild boar elimination for us here, supporting the Squeal on Pigs program that we had, supporting traceability as we went through. I just think the role of government is to provide that infrastructure that allows us to succeed in the end. So.
I just add something real quick that I noticed. I think we need to just make sure that everybody knows here today that this was also sponsored by Alberta Pork. And so appreciate that our logo's there, but thank you very much, Darcy. Appreciate it.
You two are wrapped around beef. I still have my bacon thing in.
That's a loaded question.
Does it mean where it clicks or it does not? Perfect. No, no ostriches either, Noel. We heard a lot already today, think about the importance of building trust and the importance of face-to-face and personal relationships in building that trust. I think one thing I struggle with, and maybe we'll talk about this maybe tomorrow as well, is how do you build trust with 16 or 18,000 people, or 3.5 million people, in the Alberta government, or it's how do you reach the people that you need to reach to spread that influence and to build that trust?
That's a good question. It kind of goes back to my point of is we can do what we can to reach those people, but the people have to have their ears open and be accessible. you know, there's been, and I don't know how to do that. I think that goes back to that communication. It's the magazines, it's the social media, it's the commissions, it's the producer to producer, it's the going out to the coffee shops, it's the minister and I touring around the province and talking to different groups, meeting with different associations, different events. It's being out there. It's being accessible. As government, we have to be accessible. You know, we have to get on the road and go. I mean, everybody's busy, you know, wherever you're at in the province, everybody's busy, but it's that getting out there and just meeting people and getting the message out there somehow that we are accessible, like phone. That was one of the things when I took this job. You know, boy, there's a lot of people have my personal phone number, and they call it, and that's good. That's what we want to hear. Is like just phone. Like don't be you know, don't think you're intruding, or I mean that's what it's all about, is that communication. It's, you know, if we don't know why you're pissed off, we can't fix it. So we need to know what the problems are and to try to fix it. And we need to be able to get the message out to you what we're looking at. It's that, you know, it's that team approach. It's the back and forth. It's you know, what can we do? And that's not just between us and the, you know, producers in our province and the groups. It's between us and the other provinces. It's our neighbor provinces. We work very closely with Minister Merritt and his team. You know, we talk a lot, you know, his department, our department, you know, BC, across Canada. It's really neat to see that when we go to these FPT meetings, how, you know, how well the provinces and territories get along in agriculture. You know, not so much in some of the other ministries, but we do, because we're all there for the same reason. And you know, it's that learning. It's like I said about, you know, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia with the irrigation. It's about, you know, what are you hearing that are issues? What are you doing to reach your producers and your processors and, you know, the value added companies to get them in? It's not an easy answer. It's just, you got to get out there. You got to just keep talking and talking and talking, and until you're blue in the face, and, you know, people are following you all weekend. That's why we're in these roles. That's what we do. And okay, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add one thing real quick, and I think Karen's point is really important that we need to think about as a commission as we go into another round of producer meetings, and traceability is going to be a conversation. One of the things that I think sometimes we forget is part of that narrative being driven on social media wasn't coming from agriculture. It was coming from paid social media agitators. And so that is a massive challenge that we're going to probably face again as we're coming up to the next set of producer meetings, which are going to take place in October and November this year. And it's something that us as a team have got to try and figure out, with hopefully some support from government agents.
Two more.
Thanks. This is just sort of building on that concept, because I'm Cathy. I'm the Executive Director of Animal Health Canada. Just is sort of building on Dr. Chowdhury's discussion about having trusted human advocacy as part of dealing specifically with the misinformation piece. And when this first started coming out around the traceability, I think one of the questions we had is, where on the producer side are the leaders to come and be voices of reason on that side? And how do we identify those people who are trusted community leaders that aren't government oriented, that aren't national or provincial organizations? How do we find those people within the community who can step up and provide their perspectives, having the wisdom and the experience and the placement in community, knowing that the few times when we see that happen, the social media community descends? So how do we leverage that piece better when engaging in these spaces? Because I don't think they're going to stop. I don't think traceability is the one-off. I'm sorry, knock on wood, Brad. But like, I think some of the foundational pieces as to why that circumstance rose up potentially exist in other areas as well. So I just wanted to know whether or not that came up in your world, Brad, whether or not people are asking similar questions, and how we can identify those demographics better.
Yeah, and we did talk about that, is who are the producers that we can utilize that are separate from the organization or from government, because we automatically got pegged with, well, they developed it, they're all against us, they're all in bed with the CFIA. I think we all heard that many times over the course of the months. And so it's, who are those people that are the trusted spokespeople? I think we can identify them. The challenge is, are they prepared to do it? Because those that did stand up and did try to defend, they took a beating. Cattle feeders, when we started to have some cattle feeders coming out to our meetings, they were really good at helping to try to kind of explain some of the things that they were already doing. But I know my buddy Miles back there is thinking, I've got folks that are frustrated. So I'm going to go there. There's that part of the community in our producer groups that are frustrated, that they didn't understand. They do not believe the technology is there. They're frustrated with connection, ability for, just connection around the province. You can go on and on. The cost benefit analysis, what did they get out of it? There's tons of questions that we still need to work through and answer. And if we're going to have those people stand up for us, we need to have helped them to make sure that they completely understand the concerns and the questions of the producers that are not aligned.
Hello, gentlemen. So I waited right till the end, but Cassidy pretty much ran the clock out, so I wouldn't have any time to ask you guys anything. But I brought it up a little earlier with this gentleman's presentation. Yes, the producers, the 70% of the cow-calf operation, the stock growers, lots of issues. We feel that our biggest trading partner, Live, has less traceability than we do. And that's one of the big things. Like, there's just so many things. I'm not hard on the people, just hard on the topic, of course, because we're all friends here, aren't we? Or were. So that's the only thing, is that there's so many, and it's not misinformation, it's not anything else. It's the fact that the cow-calf guys don't want to have to move and wand and do a lot of things with tags. 20% of our tags are lost every year, and that's a statistic. So if you buy 100 cows in 5 years, you're more than likely going to have your own tag in those cattle anyway. A lot of the TB cases in our area, it was brand inspection and bills of sale, not RFID tags or anything that was used for the traceback. So thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for your time. You guys did an amazing job.
Thank you. Nope. One comment.
No, they don't. They have everything else, and where the cattle came from.
I don't know if I'm contributing to the conversation or not, but my name is David Bexty. I'm the Member of Parliament for Bow River. I was involved in January about this. I got calls from everybody overnight, mostly smaller producers that were 65 plus years old. So I made a phone call to Tyler and with CCA, and we had a conversation. And I passed the information along. I think in some part, you're a victim of a confluence of circumstances by people in frustrations that were frustrated for a lot of other reasons unrelated to traceability. But it does go to your point that you were making earlier about conversations and connection with the producers and making sure that you have the conduits to communicate effectively with the people that matter, right? The people that you represent. And anything that you can do to reinforce that and maintain it is a good thing. And I've had some conversations with Melissa about this and about the work that's going on right now with the workshops. Do that. And make sure, I guess my last comment about that is, make sure you take the time to do it right, because this is your golden opportunity to get it right. I think speaking to producers, they understand traceability is important, very important, but everybody has to understand the value proposition of their part of traceability. And so thank you very much for everything that you've done.
Thank you. So I think that's a good place to break for the evening, mostly because we're out of time. Thank you, gentlemen.